He goes back and he finds nothing. There's no sign of them. Very, very interesting. He talks about the houses all being taken down. This is his words. He says, "We found the houses taken down and the place very strongly enclosed with a high palisade of great trees with courtines and flankers, very fort-like. And one of the chief trees or posts on the right side of the entrance had the bark taken off, and 5 foot from the ground in fair capital letters was graven Croatoan without any cross or sign of distress."
What's up, guys? If you're not subscribed, please subscribe. Also, please smash that like button on the video and enjoy the show. Andy Gabriel Powell, welcome to New Jersey, sir.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Julian.
It's great to have you here. We had an amazing conversation on the phone last month about having you in. You are essentially the preeminent historian of what is potentially the real founders of America. This is something I got to give Alessi over here credit. He was the one who turned me on to this. I had no idea about the Lost Colony of Roanoke. He started showing me some of the write-ups on it. I was like, all right, we got to get this guy in. What? How did you get into this case, though? You've been doing this for like 20 years now, no?
Yeah, actually, it's kind of a crazy story. I was a councillor or commissioner, whatever you call them here, for the local council in Bideford in North Devon. And in 2006, this guy turned up at the council and he had a little presentation clock and he was American. And he said, like to thank Bideford for 20 years of being a twin city. And we were, okay, what twin city are you from? I'm from Manteo, as they say. Right, where is Manio? It's in North Carolina. Okay, North Carolina, isn't that one of them American states? Okay, right. So at this point, the town clerk was kind of close to reaching for the phone, seriously, because we had no record of it. Nobody knew anything about it. We have, when we have twin cities, we put signs up everywhere that we are twinned with this city, that city. There's like nothing whatsoever. So it became a bit of a thing because it got picked up by the press and it went global and we got labelled the town that forgot it was twinned, and more unkindly, what a clock up was one of the titles that we saw in the newspapers. But of course, we were a little embarrassed by it, but Manio told us they had a great year with tourism because everyone wanted to know where this town of Manio was that had this thing going on. So, cut a long story short, in 2008, the then mayor of the day, myself as deputy mayor, the town clerk, we basically paid our own way to come to America to find out what on earth this crazy twinning and story was and what was it actually all about. So I must say the people of Manio treated us royally. We were taken everywhere. We went to Jamestown, we went to Williamsburg, and of course we had plenty of time in Manio as well.
Is that it on the map right there?
That's right. If you look at the island there, the island is the island of Roanoke, and Manio is the main town right there. That's it. You've got it right there. There you go.
This is right by the Outer Banks.
Yeah, pretty cool place, by the way. I have to tell you, great little town. Quick plug for the town there, but it is a great little place to go.
Gotcha.
And of course, that's where you're going to see, the National Park Service place, the festival park, where they do reenactments and you can get more of the story. So this is what happened to us. In 2008, they took us to Fort Raleigh, the National Park Service place. They took us to the festival park. They showed us all this thing. And they told us this crazy story about these people from England, mainly from Bideford, who came over in 1587 to build a colony and settle in America, and then 3 years later completely vanished. So that was just the most bizarre thing I think I've ever heard. We're talking 120 people here, just vanished. And of course they were some of them was definitely from Bideford. And the guy that brought them over was a gentleman called Sir Richard Grenville, who was the original Lord of the Manor of Bideford in the olden days, in the 1500s. But as I say, we had no information about this at all. When we looked into it, it was all Sir Walter Raleigh. Well, it was and it wasn't. So from that, I thought, this is just, I've just got hooked on this. I've just got to get to the bottom of this crazy, crazy story.
And you're still deputy mayor at this time.
I was still deputy mayor, and then I got elected as mayor.
Can we pull up that picture of you as mayor? We got to find that. Unless you'll pull it up. You keep going.
I've got, it's kind of a cool thing, but I became mayor of Bideford, and then at my inauguration speech, I made this big statement that I thought that people from Bideford were the true founding fathers of America. And so, of course, that stirred everything up, and we ended up with it making the national headlines in some of our papers, and it even made, I think, Washington Post, New York Times, that this crazy Brit wearing this ridiculous uniform.
That is some swag right there, my man. That's the thing about you Brits. You guys have such over-the-top type like garb and things you do, and then in America we're just like, it's like me rolling around in a beanie.
Well, you're missing the tricorn hat there and the white gloves, and the fact that I had 2 mace bearers and a sergeant at arms.
what?
And I even had a town crier who would walk along in front of me going, oh yay, make way for the mayor.
Like with tears and They're a crier?
No, town crier. Yeah, right, okay. Yeah, American joke here, guys. He would literally have the scroll in front and ring the bell make way for the mayor of Bideford sort of thing, shout at the top of his voice. And so this whole thing. But of course, it gave me an opportunity to get into this story. And when I made this announcement, I didn't expect to get the response I got. Within days, somebody contacted me and said, I've got some books you might be interested in. And these were the extraordinary books that were written by Richard Hakluyt, who was commanded by Queen Elizabeth I to record all the famous voyages and travels and explorations of the British people during her reign. And he gave me full access to it, and I studied it and just found more and more things about it. And then, as I say, one thing after another, it just became an obsession.
Yeah, and you were showing me, we're going to get into some of the things,
Sure,
like as it comes up in actual context, but before we were on camera, you were showing me some of these documents that, they would have to write, they obviously couldn't make copies, so they'd have to write it multiple times by hand, and we're talking, people will see it later, we're talking a lot of words. And then on top of it, I'm just thinking about you studying this stuff and coming into this in like 06, 07, 08, the language that they wrote in. I was asking you if there was like Welsh in there or something, because it's not only like different offshoots of like the English language, but there's also different letters, and some of it's in handwriting that you can't even read. Like, how did you teach yourself to be able to even understand this?
Well, for the books by Richard Hakluyt were actually printed, so that helped a little bit, but they still are written in the Old English language. Yes. And it's not just the words are very different. Words that they would use mean different things in those days. It was also the context in which they wrote them. The way that they would express themselves was kind of like, I had to look at it and reread it about half a dozen times. So that what are they actually saying here? What would this be if we translated it into modern English? So that was a big thing. But thankfully, a very good friend of mine back in England, David Carter, I must give him a plug there. He is a specialist at reading this Old English language. And with his help, I managed to kind of grasp the way it was written. But between us, we've managed to, understand what was actually being written in these documents. So it's been a long journey. So it took me fully 7 years of research and studying these documents to put the story together.
And you moved to America for good at one point, right?
Yeah, I did. February 16th.
February 2016.
2016,
okay,
yeah.
Got it. So, and where do you live now?
Greenville, South Carolina.
Which is not near where this is.
No, I would have loved to. When I first came over, I really wanted to live in the Outer Banks area, because that would have made it easier to further the quest, because, we still have a lot of unanswered questions. But in truth, it's the cost of living there, the seasonal work that's available. So, I ended up in Greenville, South Carolina.
And you wrote a book about it. We have it right here. Let me hold that sucker up. So it is called Richard Grenville and the Lost Colony of Roanoke. This is essentially like the Bible on this issue. And I wanted to bring this up early on because this was something we had talked about on the phone a lot. But you were featured in a bunch of History Channel stuff about the lost city of Roanoke. And, you know, it's History Channel. It's very hit or miss with some things. You may be going on camera for a very long time, giving people tours of areas, doing interviews, but then they're going to cut it down to get their 45-minute episodes here and there. And one of the things you had told me was that you felt like they left a lot of open-ended things in there where they cut out things you said to try to, I guess, sell something in the future where they're going to be talking about this. So I wanted to make sure you had a chance to write that all today. But maybe it's best we start at the beginning with the actual story. And then as you go along, you want to add in color of where History Channel didn't include this or got this wrong or whatever. Let's do that. So as we know it in America, or as at least in pop culture we think of it, we think of two things. We think of Christopher Columbus founding the Americas, and then I think a lot of people do know he didn't actually find like America, the USA. He found somewhere in the Caribbean. And then we think of the Pilgrims. And that was 1607?
1620.
1620. So 1620 up in Massachusetts, they meet with the Indians, have Thanksgiving, probably kill them all afterwards. But, you know, that was the whole story. What you're getting at here, as you laid out, is that this is potentially the first colony before them and before Jamestown in
1607 for Jamestown, and this 1587.
Okay. So, who were the people who came from England and landed in Roanoke allegedly in 1587?
Okay. So, what I'd like to do, if it's okay with you, Julian, is to run through it on a little bit of a timeline.
Yes, please.
Because, you know, one of the questions that I come across quite often, one of the sort of myths, if you like, is that these colonists were all criminals. You know, that's one of the kind of joke things that I've heard around, and it's complete nonsense, and I can explain why.
Yeah, please.
But initially, the whole thing about America was because the Spanish were doing rather well in Mexico and South America, making a lot of money, bringing a lot of gold back to Spain. The French were trying to settle in the St. Lawrence Riverway in Canada, of course. And France and Spain at that time were serious enemies to Britain.
Yes.
You know, they were a threat. And of course, they were building their military, their ships, etc., through the wealth of the money that they were bringing back from the Americas. So England kind of was a little bit late to the party, if you like. And so this whole thing was driven by we need to get in on this Americas thing. We need to find what's going on there and develop our own colonies and obviously, you know, find the wealth there and bring it back for ourselves as well. So what actually happened originally was that the basic timeline is that in 1583, a gentleman, I've forgotten his name. Why have I forgotten his name? Gilbert, that's right, half brother to Sir Walter Raleigh, got a charter from Queen Elizabeth to explore America. So the first place he landed was Newfoundland. And he declared that Newfoundland would be a British colony. It was the Newfoundland, which, by the way, Newfoundland was the first part of the British Empire. So I had a slightly nerdy off-topic thing there. Anyhow, he drowned on the return voyage. And then his,
Gilbert.
Yeah, Gilbert drowned on his return voyage. And Sir Walter Raleigh, being in favour with Queen Elizabeth at the time, was able to pick up the charter and carry on.
Well, can you explain what you mean by charter and how that works and how the Queen would decide?
Okay. Yeah. A charter is essentially a mandate. It's a document that says, I give you the right to go and explore this new land and see if you can make money out of it for 7 years. But obviously, Queen Elizabeth wanted a cut on that, if you like. So, it kind of, there's some things don't change, right, guys? But that's essentially what a charter is. It was just a mandate to do a license to go and try and make something out of it. So Walter Raleigh picks this up. He then organises a surveying mission in 1584, which is known as the Armadas and Barlow Voyage. 1585, there's the military colony. This is Sir Ralph Lane. He goes over, and it's essentially the military colony is kind of building a bridgehead, securing the land, securing an area to bring in planters, colonists, people behind them. There's a resupply mission to the military colony in 1586, and then 1587, that's when we get the Lost Colony, or the colony arriving of the, Mr. and Mrs. Average coming in to settle, build the colony.
How did they, and this is probably a little bit of a dumb question, but I always think about this. They're going to explore new land. A lot of it's uncharted. Obviously, when Columbus did it, like, it was completely uncharted. They know northwest, east, and south, but how did they have an idea at all at this point, post-Columbus, of the mass of land that could be there? And did they have a aiming point, if you will, or were they just like going, all right, let's go west, drift with the sea, maybe we go south, maybe we go north, wherever the sea goes, and we land where we land?
They had a starting point, and that starting point was that they knew that Spain was active in Mexico, in the Caribbean, and of course Florida, was a Spanish colony. So they knew the Spanish were there.
Still is.
Already. Still is, yeah, absolutely. And it was kind of a weird time, actually, because when this initial attempt to settle this colony first started, 1584, 1585, there was still kind of an arm's length gentleman's agreement between Spain and England. The Spanish knew the Brits were up to something, but they didn't know quite what. So they weren't at war with each other. So because of the way the trade winds work, what you would do is you would sail from England, you would go via the Canary Islands, the Azores, and then you would end up in the Caribbean, which of course is exactly what Christopher Columbus did. The winds would take you naturally to the Caribbean. So in the Caribbean, of course, they do kind of, the Spanish know they're there because the Spanish are everywhere in the Caribbean. But of course, they allowed them to, as they used to say, re-victual, get fresh water, meat, etc., and what have you, and carry on where they were going. So Armadas and Barlow, on the exploratory voyage, sailed up past Florida, keeping well offshore because they knew the Spanish were there. And then they came across Cape Fear, which is a promontory, tends to stick out a little bit on the coast. And from there on, they thought, well, that's the limit of the Spanish possessions. That they kind of knew roughly how far up the coast the Spanish had got. So they knew that north of that was kind of uncharted territory. They knew the French were in St. Lawrence River Way in Canada, but of course they knew that was that much further north. So there was this white bit on the map, if you like, between Canada and sort of Florida,
right,
where, as far as they knew, there was nobody there. So they aimed for that area.
Did they think natives might be there?
Yeah, but then so did, the U.S. cavalry. But they knew that there were Indians there.
Right.
But so we arrived and... they were looking for somewhere to settle a colony, basically, and they followed the coastline up. And Captain Arthur Barlow, in his journal, he talks about seeing an entrance between in the land, and he thought it was like a river estuary, so it would be a safe place to go and moor up and explore and see what was there. So where they actually sailed in is somewhere close to the Oregon Inlet today, which is just south of Roanoke Island. And then they moored up, and there was nobody about, so they set about exploring. But it's kind of an interesting story, actually. It's kind of first contact, if you like, in 1584.
What do you mean?
Well, so this is really what happened. Arthur Barlow and Philip Armadas are two ships. They've moored up on the Outer Banks by the Oregon Inlet, as it is today, and they're sort of surveying, is this land going to be a good place to settle? And then he records that they'd been there a couple of days, and then they saw this canoe, with 3 savages, as they called the Native American Indians at that time. Right. And then they watch this canoe, and he records that the canoe with the 3 Croatoans pulls up at the beach close to where the ships are, and then one walks up and down the shore, surveying the ship there, and eventually Barlow and a couple of the others get into one of their rowboats and row ashore and actually meet with him. And he says that the Native American Indian shows no fear, because obviously you've never seen white man before, I guess. And then what happens then is that the Native American Indian goes, does some fishing, and brings back and leaves on the shore a load of fresh fish for the English. Kind of interesting thing,
yes.
As a gift for the gods, maybe, who knows.
Guys, if you're still watching this video and you haven't yet hit that subscribe button, please take 2 seconds and go hit it right now. Thank you.
And then a few days later, the Amadis and Barlow meet the Croatoan king.
That's what they called him?
He wasn't the king. The name that they used was the local name was Wererance, but it meant the king, basically. So, Barlow refers to him as the king because he was clearly the head honcho of the nation that they met. So they meet, and then they do a little bit of feasting, they exchange gifts, etc. They meet up, and Amadis and Barlow actually get invited to the king's village, which was at that time on the north end of Roanoke Island, roughly where the Elizabethan Gardens are today. And then, of course, they then spend a few days exploring the area. They sail up the Albemarle and the Pamlico Sound and explore the general area, get a survey, get a feeling for what's there and whether it's a good place to settle a colony.
I'm curious what the logistics are here with the people. You had said a little bit ago, and I don't know if this changed along the story, but it was like 140 people or so coming on these boats?
No, this is the Survey Voyage from 1584.
So how many people are on the boats?
Okay, so you've literally just got 2 captains and some crew on these ships. So these are literally just 2 small sailing ships. Difficult to know the numbers. They don't actually record the numbers that are there, but you could say perhaps 50, maybe 60 sailors.
Oh, okay. So it's not like
really
5.
all it is, it's just 2 small ships on an exploratory mission, not trying to attract too much attention because they weren't fully aware where the Spanish were. And obviously, if they'd have sailed there with a fleet of 7 or 8 warships, the Spanish would have thought, we're going to have a bit of a scrap here. So 2 small ships is kind of insignificant. What I think is quite funny, when you look at the Outer Banks today, it is mainly sandbanks. Okay. Mm-hmm. But Barlow actually, in his report back to Sir Walter Raleigh, he says, "I think in all the world the like abundance is not to be found." So he's kind of saying that this is the land of milk and honey and that there's everything there we could possibly want to set up a colony.
Was that just overexcitement or based on empirical evidence?
I think pretty much he's kind of thinking, well, it's probably not great here, but I can't very well go back after Walter Raleigh spent all that money, and bearing in mind he was friendly with the Queen, and say, I didn't really find anywhere to set up a colony.
Right.
Because in those days it was off with your head, So
yeah, it was a better system back then. Results
yeah,
you're done.
Solves a lot of problems, guys. So it's kind of interesting that he has to report something. And so he comes back with this message that it's a fantastic, wonderful milk and honey. It's Valhalla. It's everything. What I find really interesting about the 1584 voyage is that the last statement about that voyage is he says, "We brought home also 2 of the savages, being lusty men whose names were Wanchis and Manteo."
Lusty men, like
Lusty
they were
men,
trying to fuck them?
No, big guy. You see, this is that classic thing, isn't it, guys?
You can't take me to dinner parties. I'm sorry.
Well, I don't know. Actually, it could be quite a laugh. No, you've got this thing. It's that classic thing of what the language was. It meant in those days. In those days, lusty meant sort of big, beefy, sort of strong men, and these days it doesn't necessarily mean they're lusty.
It does not.
So, but it's really important because they persuaded 2 of these Native American Indians to come back to England with them. That's what
Wait,
that
they got the
message is saying.
Croatoans to come to England with
They
them.
got 2 of them, one called Wanchese and one called Manteo, to come back to England with them. Okay?
This is on record.
This is on record.
So we know the Croatoans.
Yeah, I can show you the entry in the 1600 edition if you really need it. But yeah, they bring these 2 guys back.
Question. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
this
go for it.
is blowing my mind a little bit.
There's a lot here to blow your mind with, trust me.
So this time, as you said, it's exploratory. We're in 1584.
1584, correct.
Okay. So they don't set up a colony, but they visit with the chief. They shake hands. And you said it was just the 2 of them would go onto land and visit with the chief. I guess the crew stays
a
behind.
small party. They describe it as a small party that met the chief. I would imagine that most of the sailors and crew stayed close to the ship. They also talk about sort of rowing off into some of the creeks and rivers and exploring the area in general. So,
Got it.
it would have been a small party, sort of the mat people, maybe a dozen people you could get in a rowing boat or something like that.
So point being, the argument here of if they set up a colony doesn't happen until 1587. But if what you just told me is true, does that mean that we have basically no argument that as of right now on the information we have, they were the first people to at least land in greater US&A?
This is the first recorded evidence we have of first contact between English and Native Americans in, ever.
Confirmed.
This is like, numero uno.
So this seems to make the argument about if there was a colony a lot easier. They literally brought home a couple souvenirs in the form of people.
That's about it.
Like, what's the question here?
Okay. Well, there's no question what they were doing. Although it's not actually recorded how they agreed that they would take these 2 back. Wanchese and Manteo were clearly deemed by the king of the Croatoans to be worthy representatives of the Croatoan nation. And I think what conversation probably took place was they may well have shown them a picture. We don't know this, it's not documented, but they may well have shown a picture of Queen Elizabeth in all her finery and what have you. Because what we do know is that the Croatoans were really, really keen on all the fancy sort of clothes and everything that, of course, the English were wearing at that period. As you've seen on the front cover, that's a pretty cool outfit to be wearing. And if they turn up wearing that sort of stuff, and of course they have swords and they have muskets and they have all this paraphernalia with them.
We got to bring that stuff back. I'm in.
Yeah,
I'll wear that.
Yeah, we need it. We really need it. Just think about it. Without getting into the politics, your musket has only got 1 shot, and it's going to take you 30 seconds to get it set up to fire it.
Not that part.
You could run away by then, guys.
not that part. The rest of it, though. We'll keep the AR-15s or the AK-47s, but we'll get the swag.
You get the swag, absolutely. Get the swag. Pretty glorious swag too. But no, if you think about it, Native American Indians never seen white man before. They could almost be men from outer space, whatever. They've never seen them before. And then they showed, they got all this finery and they got these 2 huge ships, which are a lot bigger than a dugout canoe, that have sailed across this ocean. The Croatoans have no idea what's on the other side of that ocean. And then they show them the picture of this woman that they bow to, Queen Elizabeth. And then you've also got to bear in mind that the Croatoan society was matriarchal. The women, although there was a king, the women made the key decisions. So what more sort of affinity could a Native American tribe have than to say, we'll send 2 of our best representatives to meet this great sort of queen of these people that have all this finery and these ships and all that.
Did they think she was like a god, kind of, or?
There's no suggestion of that, but I think they must have seen her as very powerful. And you've got to bear in mind that we do know that Barlow and Amadas, i.e. the people on these ships, they fired off their weapons. So that would have been the first time these Croatoans saw them, I don't know, kill a deer at 200 yards with a single shot. rather than trying to use bow and arrows to bring the thing down. And you have to bear in mind that Native American tribes of that period were at war with each other.
Like,
they
all
weren't.
right, let's break that down.
Yeah, they weren't all friendly with each other. Some of these tribes would fall out. It's exactly the same as it through history. That there might be a marriage between two, a guy and a woman from different tribes to make it all more friendly and like peace treaty. And then there might have been others that they were having a skirmish with and having a fight with all the time. So if you're the king of the Croatoans and you've got these guys that have got these fire sticks, shall we call them that, these guns and what have you, they would be pretty useful allies on your side if you got into a fight with another tribe. So was it going through their mind that this is actually a pretty cool idea to actually have, them on your side? And in fact, the drawing that you've just brought up there is thought to be a representation of Manio. So that's certainly what they were wearing, and that's what they were presented to Queen Elizabeth wearing, essentially.
Alessi, can you go to the Wikipedia page of the Croatoans? I just want to see something real quick. This is the Native American history is something I'm so interested in that I got to go way deeper on. It's right there on the right side. See, ethnic group, right side. Yeah. So, do we know how big they were approximately? Like how many people they had?
I don't think we do. We know the territory that they tended to, that they had, and it was mainly Hatteras Island, Roanoke Island, and a little bit of the coastal shore area. But it's not defined in any of the voyages or any of the transcripts exactly how big their nation was.
But they were, I think you were telling me before camera, they were a subset, like a subsidiary offshoot group of the Algonquin.
Correct. Yeah,
tribe?
they were Algonquin. Much of their dress, much of their language was Algonquin. So they were part of the Algonquin nation, as it were. Although obviously at that time we had no comprehension of what the Algonquin nation was.
Right. So how many major tribes were active in America at this time? Are we talking like 10, 20?
I would suggest hundreds.
But I mean, when I say major, I mean like not just like Croatoans and their equals, but like the Algonquins and their equals. You know what I mean?
So the Algonquins, on the East Coast, you had the Algonquins. Further north, the people that were essentially met with the Pilgrim Fathers were the Iroquois. Nation. And then I forget the name, but there was another nation down in Florida, which is still very prevalent down there now. So there were these larger groups, but then you've still got things like the Cheyenne were a nation, etc., in Western North Carolina. They hadn't met them at that time, of course. I dare say the Catawba were a large tribe, but I think Catawba were possibly Algonquin. I'm not sure about that. We really don't know how many sort of ethnic sort of groups there were in America at the time. I think from one of the best sources I've seen, I think quotes about 30 or 40 nations.
Then you had the Wild Wild West. You had the Comanches, the Lakota. There's a ton of others out there too, and that's completely at this point like unknown world.
Absolutely.
Wow. Okay, so they take the two Comanches back to...
Two Croatoans back to England.
Croatoans back to England. Right.
Yeah, interesting point, and I can email this to you if you want it. But this is the map that Arthur Barlow drew of the Outer Banks.
Yeah, can you give that to Alessi? He'll put it in the corner of the screen.
Sure.
Okay, and actually, let me take a look at that, if you don't mind. So what year was this from? 1586?
No, this is 1584. This is the map that Arthur Barlow drew of what he saw, the locations.
So he's looking west.
That's correct.
Bottom to top is east to west.
Absolutely. And you'll note there's a small island on its own with some scribbling on it.
And that's...
It says a King's Isle. Well, that's Roanoke.
Whoa. That's like... Do we still have that map up, Alas? Yeah. That's pretty good.
That's not bad for a sketch, is it?
It's like really good. Wow. God, I always wonder that, like how the first people came up with actually being able to get the get the size. I mean, he's a little off on sizing, but that's very impressive.
Okay, so if you think that's good, wait until I show you the map that John White drew a year later. So
Johnny White had to show him up,
yeah,
huh?
would you like me to just pitch that one to you now?
Yeah, let's see it.
Okay. Let me...
And where did you get these maps again?
These are all in the various archives. So we have a national archive in England. Some of them are in the British Museum. They're literally all over the place. You really kind of have to dig deep and look in about 30 or 40 different sources to find some of this stuff. Let me put there. Where are you? There we are. So
And who drew that first map again we just looked at?
right, so it's we don't know exactly who drew it, but it's attributed to Captain Arthur Barlow, one of the captains of the two ships.
And
There
now
is
you
a-
want to show
there is
me
a-
White's.
Yeah, now there is a belief that that map was drawn by John White and that he was on the 1584 voyage. I think if he was on that voyage, then you would have seen a slightly better map than that. And I can show you John White's effort a year later if you'd like to see that.
Let's see it.
Okay, this is another one I probably need to send.
Someone's going to the hospital out there right now. Sometimes the ambulance is a noise that actually gets through. We have really good soundproofing, but
I'm sure we wish them
much
all the
health.
best, much
Yes.
health. So let me punch that in there. And add that.
Oh yeah, Leslie, I forgot to tell you that was the thing he was showing me right before.
This.
Yeah. If you stick up the third screen right now for people to see, we're gonna take a look at this in a little bit. This is nuts. The story behind this too. That
Yeah.
was the one you said they had to copy like 3 times or something, like by hand.
Yeah, look at that.
Quill pen. Makes you appreciate all the stuff we have now. When I see what these people had to do, just like take a shit. I mean, my God.
They kept it all in line. There's no lines. Like, it's all perfectly written.
Yeah. It's and they have like they even have like the beginning of the chapter thing where they write in bigger font themselves.
So why won't that let me get in there? I need to open up. Sorry, I'm just struggling here a moment.
No, it's all good. I actually, side note, while Andy's looking, you had told me a few weeks ago to listen to that. What's his name? Taylor Sheridan? Is that it?
Yeah.
Yeah, the guy who does Yellowstone, which I hadn't really watched Yellowstone.
Yeah.
That was a great recommendation. That was an amazing Rogan episode. But I went and watched 1883.
How good is that?
Shit's nuts, bro.
Dude, I'm glad you watched it. That one left Emily and I shook.
And it's only like 140 years ago. You think about it, the wild, wild west that was, and how just people just died. Oh, didn't make it across the river today.
Yeah. Get a cut, you're screwed.
Oh my God! Like rattlesnake bit you while you were taking a piss. Like you just watch it and they just like, oh well, he's gone. Let's move on. And you're like, this is not that long ago. And now, looking at this wall, looking at what we have now,
Yeah.
it's crazy.
They would just drop like flies. Like, you see how, not giving anything away, but just like how it was, like they would literally caravan over and like more than 50% would be gone.
Yeah.
Like they just would drop, and it was just so common. And the guys that took care of them, that were guiding them out, they're like, look, most of you are going to die. And you're just like, what a risk. Back then.
No court system. It's just court of the gun. That's it. Just like kill each other.
Yeah.
And, and by the way, people, if you are not in our Patreon, Alessi and I do an episode like this now every week where we actually go back and forth on stuff for, an hour and a half, 2 hours. But little plug right there in the description. But anyway, I'm just like blown away at how many things could possibly go wrong at every instant. Like, it's less surprising if we're talking about like 1550 or something. But you think, because right now we're talking about 1585, like all the things that could go wrong. Okay, that makes sense. Like 1883, like Malacca, we had fought like 2 major wars in the last 100 some years at that point. It's crazy.
Yeah.
And by the way, Andy's telling me to take a quick time out because he got to find this file. So we'll be right back, everybody. All right, we're back. So we're going to use Alessio will just go back and forth between the HDMIs
Sure.
to keep that easy. So we have it. Wait, this is the map you were talking about in 1586?
This is 1585. Now, obviously, Barlow and Amadis have gone back and said land of milk and honey. And then what they do is Raleigh gets together with his cousin, Sir Richard Grenville, and says, I need a military colony to build a bridgehead there. And we're going to send over a guy who can record what you see, which you want a painter to do that in those days because nobody had a camera, of course. And this particular map that you can see on the screen there, Virginia Pars, which is what it's known as, this is the map that John White drew of the Outer Banks of North Carolina in 1585.
How did they get it that good? They don't have a drone.
No, and it's pretty
Or
much.
did they?
It's pretty much. Yeah, okay. No. Conspiracy theories here, guys. What I find extraordinary is you can see the Pamlico Sound, you can see the Albemarle Sound, you can see Roanoke, you can see Ocracoke Island, you can see Hatteras Island there. The sort of angular piece in the middle of Hatteras Island is obviously the point around Hatteras Point. Where it's Cape Hatteras there today. And of course, you can see Lake Mattamuskeet, which is the large inland lake there. And that's very much, you can see that on modern day maps as well.
Wow.
So, incredibly detailed map. Lots to talk about on this map, but yeah, there you go. And that's pretty cool. There's Roanoke there. So, quite extraordinary map.
insane.
There is quite a story behind this map, which is kind of jumping a little bit forward in the story. If you want to go there now, because we've got the map up, we can do that.
Yeah. We'll
Okay.
go whatever you think is good.
Okay, so when you look closely at this map, you can see, and you can see right now on the left of the screen there, can you see that like little patch? There you go,
Right there.
that little patch. There is another patch on the map further down on the map as well, which is much larger. Now, there we go, right
Right
right there. You
Like
can
across
see,
the
yeah,
fingers?
absolutely. Now, there was a great deal made a few years ago about that patch, the top patch that's on that fork in the river there, because underneath that patch there is a big mark that looks like a fort. Okay, and a fort, like a place. X marks a spot. This is where we're going to build our town. Okay, and much has been made of it, but no, guys. In 1585, when John White was making this map, that map has been studied, it's been X-rayed, it's been treated all sorts of investigative sort of methods, and the map is littered with sort of corrections. Okay, where things have been painted over, ships have been painted over, outlines have been changed. You can see that there's two patches on there. Well, that patch is covering a large sort of X marks a spot fort.
Is this? I'm just asking. Like while we're on this, like is that stuff? Is that what you're talking about? Like
No.
where we literally see blotches.
No,
Where they
no, that's
went
just
over
the
something?
age on the map. If you look to that, there you go, where the cursor is right now.
Yeah, those ones are obvious. But
Right. Well, that is
sounds
the
like
obvious
there's a
point,
lot.
right? Now, underneath that, they found when they X-rayed it a large sort of square mark that has been described as a hidden fort.
And you're like, no.
No, guys.
No good evidence.
I've actually got the report that has the information on there, and I can cover that for you from that. It's on the PowerPoint that I've got there, what's actually been said about it. My point is that the map is covered in mistakes that have all been painted over or pieces of paper stuck on it. And it's very, very clear that in the military colony of 1585, they decide that the Outer Banks is not a great place to build a town. Okay, very shallow
Okay.
water. Some of the natives on the mainland are starting to get into fights with them, etc. And the main thing is, it's very shallow water. There's not a lot of food there. You can't really grow crops on sand, etc. And the military colony does a lot of exploration. And one of the explorations they make is to Chesapeake Bay, where Jamestown is. Okay. So
Way ahead of when Jamestown allegedly
absolutely. So at that point, they realize there's better places to build the fort, okay, to build your town. But of course, by then, John White's done this painting with this big blotch that says X marks the spot. That's where we're going to build the town. Because at one point they thought it was a good place because it had a deep anchorage, etc. But in 1585, there was no such thing as whiteout or Tipex. So what are you going to do? You've got to cover it up. It's been portrayed that it was hidden to ensure that that if the map fell into the hands of the Spanish, they wouldn't see the hidden fort. Now, bearing in mind that the Spanish are masters of espionage, do you really think the Spanish wouldn't have looked at that map and said, I wonder what's under that piece of paper?
The Spanish were experts of espionage at that time?
There's a lot of records in Elizabethan England that, the Spanish and the English didn't trust each other. There was this entente cordiale. There was this kind of mutual kind of like, we're okay, guys. But, as soon as the backs were turned, it was like, what are they up to? Because they saw each other as their biggest enemy. So what was going on? There's documentary evidence, and I have got a quote in here actually at one point where, there is this comment that they don't trust this particular Spanish guy because they think he's a spy and what have you. And we know that the Spanish were just very, very good at that. They were curious to know what the English were up to, and they were doing all they could to find out. Well, to talk about that patch as being some kind of invisible ink message or something like that, it's just nonsense. Essentially, that patch was there to cover up a change of what they were going to do. In 1585, the military colony came to the conclusion that they wanted that it was better to go to Chesapeake Bay because they found the Indians there were friendly. They found deep water anchorage. There was more room to grow crops.
And so the Indians there were, so they had, I'm trying to keep this straight, they had been there?
The military colony had been up to, part of their explorations that they did in 1585 was to make their way to Chesapeake Bay.
And where specifically again?
Chesapeake Bay is literally to the north, so I think it's just off the map. So if you,
let's pull up.
So
Chesapeake.
it's you've kind of got a representation there, but it's very generic. But that's Chesapeake Bay.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
Okay.
We're gonna disconnect that. We'll probably swing that back over in a little bit when we need something. But so then they go back. You said they went back with two Croatoans in 1585.
Yeah. So let's sort that out. So they go back with these Croatoans, and then they're presented to Queen Elizabeth, and then Sir Walter Raleigh says, okay, we need to get a bridgehead. We need a military colony there to secure the area before we bring in civilians to build our colony.
Okay.
So Richard Grenville gets the job of leading that colony over there. This is where we get to the myth about why Sir Walter Raleigh never set foot on American soil, because it was Richard Grenville that went. You've got the indenture at this point.
What was his background?
So Richard Grenville?
Yeah.
Richard Grenville was a military man. His father was the captain of the Mary Rose. And the Mary Rose was King Henry VIII's flagship, that actually sunk in Portsmouth Harbour. And Richard Grenville, Richard Grenville lost his father in that. His father was drowned in that. The Mary Rose was what's left of it was razed and is now like a major museum in Portsmouth in the south of England. But
Whoa.
Richard Grenville's father, as I say, was a sea captain. He was a military man. And that's what Richard Grenville learned. He cut his teeth as a military man. He went on campaigns against the Ottoman Empire in Hungary. We know that at the age of 19, he was a bit of a naughty boy, because he is recorded at the age of 19 of getting into an argument with someone, and I quote, running him through with his sword. meaning he killed someone at 19 with his sword. So
You called it naughty.
yeah, it was
a very
naughty,
polite
you know,
way of putting
yeah,
that.
Yeah, just a little bit delinquent, you know.
Yeah.
But my point is that he was very, very strong, well-regarded military man. He had campaigns in Southern Ireland, etc. So he was considered the man for the job.
Okay.
Okay.
And so at this time, how old is he?
Let me think. He was born in 1542, so he's going to be 43 years old.
Okay. And so they say, all right, we need to go back over there, set up a military colony,
Yeah.
which is then. How would they do that? When they say set up a military colony, obviously you keep using the word fort. What would go into that? Are they building giant walls around somewhere, or are they just literally setting up tents? How would it work?
Okay. When they arrive on Roanoke Island, they were greeted as friends by the Croatoans. But part of the military, part of the group that went over in 1585 were gentlemen. You know, there were Sir this, Sir that sort of thing. And so there were two parts to this colony. There was the military people, and then there was all these people who I think basically were being encouraged to go and have a look with a view to, you need to invest in my colony. Yeah. They were investors. They were looking at there and seeing what was in it for them and whether they wanted to put their money into it. So that's one part of what was going on. And those people stayed with the Native Americans in the Croatoan village. The sort of riffraff, the general sort of men, if you like, the non-officer ranks, built a fort. Now, the fort would have been built out of what materials were available, and what materials were available, of course, are trees. So they would have built a wooden palisaded fort, probably triangular in design, which is the design used on the original Jamestown fort, because it's very defensive. It's very defendable. When you have sort of like turrets on the corner, you can see along the flanks and what have you. So they would have built that as a military base camp, if you like, for the men. And then from there, of course, they then went off exploring, surveying the land to try and find the gold that they thought might be there, and obviously to find a better anchorage, to find a place where they could settle the colony and build a future there. So the military colony's job was to establish a bridgehead, a secure area where they could bring in civilians to plant the land, grow crops, and establish something there. And we actually have some information here about what they were actually sort of people that they were looking for, but we can come to that in a minute.
So you had said they had a crew of we don't know for sure, but the first time they were doing the exploratory mission in 1584, it's a crew, it's a couple captains and a crew of maybe 50, 60 guys. When Sir Richard Grenville goes over, is it a similar contingent?
No.
Or it's different
He's
now?
going over with a more significant force. He goes over with 5 ships and
Women and children too? Or?
No, just men. And within those ships, there are a number of, as I say, people who are being kind of courted as potential investors. So they're there to see what there is for them in it. But we know that when Richard Grenville left, sailed back to England after sort of leaving the colony there in 1585, there were 104 military men left behind.
Okay.
Under the charge of Sir Ralph Lane. So these are pure army. This is a pure militia army, etc.
And they're armed, obviously.
And they're armed, yeah, absolutely. And their job is to secure the area, do all of those things that military talk about when you I suppose you could use the term invasion if you like, but
sure.
It wasn't really an invasion, but that's essentially what it was. They were going to secure the area. Okay, the Indians are friendly, so they can stay, but anyone that's not friendly to us, we need to get rid of them and clear the area so that we can say, right, that's where we can build the colony. That's where it's going to be safe to have the civilians based, etc.
Did they have any weaponry besides guns? Like, did they have cannons and stuff too, or that left behind?
They would have had some small cannon, but not sort of, these things are really heavy to maneuver around. So they probably built some defensive positions. They may have had a few cannon on the outer banks, sort of just in case. But I think it's more literally what you could carry with you. Sure. It's kind of interesting because you remember I mentioned with the 84 voyage that Mardas and Barlow kind of just 2 ships. You sail by the Canaries across to the Caribbean and refuel there, if you like, and then sail up the coast. Well, the Grenville military colony voyage of 1585 did exactly the same thing. But of course, when they arrive in the Caribbean, the Spanish are a little bit more aware something big's going on because he turns up with 5 ships and a load of military men. A little bit kind of interesting here because, and I would love to get this point across if I can, the encounter with the Spanish in the Caribbean is fascinating because when they arrive on Hispaniola, so that's Haiti, etc., there is this wonderful quote. They meet with the Spanish, and the Spanish are very wary of them because there's a sizable military force that they can see on these ships. And this is probably Grenville speaking, or one of the men on the crew. He says, "Our men provided 2 banqueting houses, one for the gentlemen, the other for the servants, and a sumptuous banquet was bought and served by us with the sound of trumpets and consort of music," so a little band playing, wherewith the Spaniards were more than delighted, which banquet being ended, the Spaniards, in recompense of our courtesy, caused a great herd of white bulls to be brought together and appointed for every gentleman and captain a horse ready saddled, and then they singled out one of the bulls and then gave sport and chased the bull down and finally killed it, etc. And he says the pastime grew very pleasant for the space of 3 hours. So there's this crazy kind of entente cordiale thing going on, but all the time everyone's wary of each other. What I particularly like about this is that during the course of their Caribbean voyages, they capture a Spanish ship. So they leave Hispaniola, and then there's a single Spanish ship. So, we'll take the spoils of war sort of thing. So they capture the Spanish ship. And the Spanish captain actually wrote his deposition to say, "This is what happened to me when I was in the hands of Grenville." And he quotes that there were 2 Indians on board, and they were richly dressed, spoke good English, and were lovers of music.
When
He's
they say
talking
richly
about
dressed.
Wanchese and Manio coming
Yes.
back. So 1584, they go over as Native Americans, and by the time they come back in 1585, they are richly dressed, are dressed as Englishmen. They spoke good English, and they love music. Isn't it fascinating that whole cultural thing goes on in a year? So when Manio was the one that was entrusted with looking after what became the Lost Colony, but of course he was already very anglicised in 1585.
Spoke great English already.
Spoke great English already. Isn't it fascinating?
So fascinating.
So I'm kind of crazy, but I particularly like that. But
do we have evidence that they actually met Queen Elizabeth? What number was she at the time?
Number 1, the first one.
So she was the first.
Yeah, we've only had 2 Elizabeths.
There's only been 2?
Yeah.
I didn't even know that.
Yeah.
I studied world history a little bit too, but I didn't even realize that.
Yeah, both pretty formidable actually when you think about it, because Elizabeth I was kind of the founder of what became the British Empire. It started under her lead. We became a major sea power under her.
The Elizabethan age.
Yeah, Elizabethan age, hey. And then, of course, we had Elizabeth II, or Elizabeth II, as you guys would probably call her,
well, we'd probably give her the second. We give it a few syllables.
Who rules for like 70 years or whatever it was.
Right. You got to give us some credit. I know we're like kind of animals over here compared to you guys, but, we still have some dignity.
Ungrateful colonials, I mean,
Listen, you lost the war. I'm sorry. I hate to break it to you.
Well, guys, you hid behind trees. I mean, come on, that's cheating.
Listen, we got to use our land to our advantage. Just because we're not coming out and having tea before we shoot each other,
it would have all blown over if you'd have just given us the tea back, we would have probably gone away. But you didn't. You threw it in the harbour, and I'm sorry, guys. You know our Brits and our tea.
That's true, but you guys started it. To be honest with you, like what was the whole Lexington massacre? I mean, we're not getting those people back.
Yeah,
that's
but
first
then
blood.
It was representation without taxation. And then the
Yes.
first thing when you were on your own, Pennsylvania said, I'm not paying taxes. So you then had to write the Constitution. Because
Goddamn
they
right.
were going to, they were going to go off and do their own thing, guys. Come on,
All right. Well,
anyway, back to the plot.
The more fun times
Back
where
to the
we got
plot.
along.
So anyway, the military colony has done their explorations, etc. One of the big problems with the military colony is they don't know how to look after themselves food-wise. They didn't know how to hunt. They didn't know how to fish.
Wait, they didn't know how to hunt?
Well, I mean, they would, but to skin it and what have you, and to provide enough food for the military colony. They were really pretty, and the thing is, they saw the Native American Indians as an easy source of food because the Native Americans were quite happy to feed them to start with.
Hey guys, if you have a second, please be sure to share this episode around on social media and with your friends, whether it's Reddit, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, doesn't matter. It's all a huge help. It gets new eyeballs on the show, and it allows us to grow and survive. So thank you to all of you who have already been doing that, and thank you to all of you who are going to do so now.
But we think at about that time there was a bit of a famine on the Outer Banks, failed crops, that kind of thing. So friction built up between the Native American Indians and the military colony.
What were the main grown sources at the time?
Indian corn. So a type of corn that they made was one of the big things. And then literally it was what you could catch or shoot, deer, rabbit, etc., or if you could fish. But again, the military men, most of them didn't know how to fish. They would have fished with a rod and line, but you can't fish that way on the inland sea. You need to build fish traps. So they didn't know how to do that. There were a lot of issues. So we do have various records. Ralph Lane talks all throughout that military colony about food becoming a bit of a problem. And there are a few scraps. There was another incident which didn't go down too well, which was that, and I've got the note here, on the 16th of July, so 16th of July 1585, it says the 16th we returned thence, and one of our boats with the admiral was sent to this Native American village to demand the return of a silver cup which one of the savages had stolen from us. So, they assumed it had been stolen. And then they go on about, and not receiving it according to his promise, we burned and spoiled their corn and town, and all the people being fled, or they actually shot some of them. We know that there was
over a cup?
Over this silver cup, which they couldn't prove had been stolen anyway. Yeah.
Nice people.
Nice people. So, yeah, it's British arrogance,
Yeah, well, at least you can call it like you see it.
Yeah, but
so they're killing some of the, they thought that was going to go over well?
At the time, probably they did, but no, it didn't, evidently. But anyway, the point is that it was getting harder and harder for them to survive. And as early 1586 comes along, so they've overwintered on the Outer Banks.
Has Grenville gone back yet?
Grenville's gone back. Okay. He's left the colony there, stays for a month to make sure they're set up, and then he goes back. When he goes back, he's already aware that he needs to bring more supplies.
Okay.
Because as a military man, he's looked at the place and he said, it's a sandbank. It's not the land of milk and honey that Barlow and Armada said it was. And, of course, he's going to go and tell Sir Walter Raleigh it's a sandbank,
But do they also, I mean, did he have a concept of not how much land, but that there was at least significant land west of where they were?
No, they didn't know. Not until really, I think it was actually probably 150 years later that they realized, because one of the things they thought was that it would be a shortcut to the Spice Islands in the East Indies. They really weren't aware of how wide America was. They thought maybe, a couple of days sort of travel over land and we might get to the Pacific Ocean. Well, it took them a little bit longer than a couple of days, but they didn't know that at the time. This colony was primarily about, if Spain can get gold out of Mexico and South America, there must be gold in America. There was no Wall Street back then, unfortunately, but that was one of the main things. It was seen as a source of income for the fledgling British Empire at the time. That was the whole kind of desire to settle here in America. What actually happened eventually was that Sir Francis Drake, who had just sacked or burnt the Spanish fort at St. Augustine, sails up the coast and thinks, I'll pop in on the military colony and see how they're doing. So he kind of calls by and tries to offer them a ship and a little bit of help. But what happens in the end, and it's a little bit confused, there seems to have been some storm, there might have been a hurricane going on or whatever. And in the end, he says to the leader of the military colony, Ralph Lane, do you guys want to lift home? And so, having kind of starved and annoyed the Indians and finding it getting a bit too much to be there, Ralph Lane said, yeah. So him and all the entire military colony get on Sir Francis Drake's ships and sail for England and essentially abandon Roanoke.
So this is 1586?
This is this is about May time, 1586.
So no one's there now?
No one's there now.
Plot thickens.
The plot thickens. Okay, so a couple of things I want to talk about this colony. We've mentioned the Fort Raleigh thing. I'm here to tell you now that the National Park Service Fort Raleigh, that 300,000 visitors a year see, on Roanoke Island, is not the Fort Raleigh that Ralph Lane built.
Okay. What
that is, nobody really knows. It's a sconce. It's a very small banked enclosure. And it's actually a reconstruction of something that an archaeologist called J.C. Harrington discovered in 1955. But is it anything to do with the Lost Colony? I doubt it, because one of the kind of strange things about it is that his reconstruction was built on top of some of his own archaeology, which he said was from that period. So how could the fort be from the same period as the other archaeology? Because you would essentially be building over something that was still being used at the same time. It doesn't make any sense. Do you see where I'm going with that? And besides that, it's rather small for 104 military men. It just would never have worked. It's completely the wrong style. It's also in the wrong location. Because when you're building a military fort, first thing, it was visible from the ocean side, which means if the Spanish came in, they would see it, which is not a good move because you're still a little bit flaky with the Spanish. It's not on the highest ground, which it should have been. Most forts and castles, you look in England at a castle, they're all on top of a hill. No fresh water source nearby. And no safe anchorage or deep anchorage for a ship. So strategically, what is Fort Raleigh today is in entirely the wrong place.
So why do they still insist on showing this?
Politics, perhaps.
What? For what? No one cares. They're not fighting over that for the election. You know what I mean?
But I mean, you've got 300,000 people who might think that they've been duped into looking at something which isn't really Fort Raleigh. I don't know what that structure really was. I don't know what J.C. Harrington was seeing. I've read his notes from that period, his report, and I don't know what he's seeing. And a lot of archaeologists privately will say to you, but not publicly, it's not the fort. It couldn't be. You wouldn't get 104 men into Fort Raleigh, which is this peculiar little sconce.
Have you ever ambushed one of the guided tours there? This is all a lie. Everyone leave, disperse.
Well, actually, joking aside, it very nearly. I try and be diplomatic because they're selling my book there. So guys, I got to be nice about this. But no, actually, it's kind
Page 72.
It's kind of funny because I had some British friends come over in September. And I took them there to see it because they wanted to see this connection with Bideford. So I took them there. And I'm talking to them and I'm saying, this is not Fort Raleigh and this is why it's not Fort Raleigh. And I give them the story that I've just given you guys. And behind me is the National Park Service ranger talking to about 30 people about the fort. And I can hear them in the background. And I'm talking quietly about this. And then before I know it, there's like several people have wandered away from the National Park Service and they're coming and they're stood within earshot of what I'm talking about. And so I kind of stopped thinking, oh, wait, maybe we're in the way of them. And they were like, no, carry on. It's really interesting what you've got to say. So, yeah, there's probably several people that now know it's in America that now know it's not Fort Raleigh, other than the archaeologists.
Well, now there's a few more listening to this. Did they have that on the History Channel thing? Did they talk about that? I don't remember that.
No, they don't. I mean,
did they ask you about it though on camera and then not put it in?
They did, but it's not going to. Say privately, a lot of archaeologists probably won't go on record as saying it's not that. And once upon a time, it was the Fort Raleigh. Now it's kind of labelled as a recreation of what it might have been, but it's not. They would have built a wooden palisade. The material that they would have built their fort out, a defendable fort, a fort you could defend, right? You'd build it out of the trees. You'd have built a wooden palisade. Think your Wild West soldiers, what did they build their forts out of? Trees.
Yeah.
It's defendable, it's defensible. So
how much confrontation or even like cancellation of your thoughts have you run into among the, I won't even say archaeology community, like the historian community of this time period?
Okay, I think amongst the archaeologists I know, I've not really met too much resistance because I think privately they also realise it's not Fort Raleigh. But again, there's a bit of politics at play. So they don't publicly come out with it because
such a problem.
It would be very easy to, come on guys, in the land of conspiracy theories, you've only got to say something that doesn't conform and everyone thinks you're crazy.
That's right.
So, but here's my punchline for you. We found where that fort probably was. A few of us found where that fort probably was. We found the right kind of outline. We found the right kind of anomalies. We put a ground-penetrating radar over what looked like the ditch that would have been associated with it. We found an anomaly at 3 to 4 feet deep. And the governing body that control permits for digging archaeology on National Park Service land would not give us the permit to dig it and find out.
Did they give you a reason?
Oh, they said, oh, no, we need a full report and blah, blah, blah. And we said, well, we can't give you a full report until we investigate the anomaly. It's that chicken and egg thing. It's just going round in circles, which came first, So we can't give them the report because we need to investigate the anomaly. But they won't let us investigate the anomaly because they say we need the full report.
Did you discuss this publicly?
I haven't gone public with it because...
Well, here we go.
Yeah, I know, right, guys? It's a frustration. Part of me, again, if I was a conspiracy theorist, and I really am not, but I would kind of almost feel that the National Park Service probably realised there's something there that needs investigating. But again, politically, it would be an awful lot of egg on their face if for the last 70 years they've been showing people the wrong fort.
Yeah, I don't... The lane you're looking at here with just this general idea of the Lost Colony of 1587, I don't, it doesn't strike me as conspiracy. It's more just like fact of, oh, this town in England may have been here first and set up a few people, and we're going to get to obviously what could have happened here. But it's very, like, people fight over things, for example, the pyramids, because there's so many potential possibilities there that even get to the crazy.
Yeah.
Now, I know History Channel tried to put some words in your mouth there with some things, but escaping some of that, it's just a really interesting historical story. I don't see why things like that are, I mean, I guess I can guess why they are, but I think it's very stupid that things like that could be treated by mainstream, people as political points off for thinking differently, but it's sad to me that you have to use phrases like, well, I bet privately they think that this is what happened. But they're not going to say that
Yeah,
publicly.
it is that public sort of thing. I mean, on one last point on this whole thing about this fort, right? It's a wooden palisade, okay? Now, if it was the mound that you see there today as Fort Raleigh, okay, because all it is a grassy mound, sort of ring, just an outline of a mound, okay, then in 1587, and I know we're jumping forward, but this is the last note on the Fort Raleigh thing. In 1587, when John White comes back, now bearing in mind he was there in 1585 with a military colony, he produced that map that you've just shown, the Virginia Pars map. When he comes back in 1587 with the civilian colony, the first thing he's doing is looking to find Fort Raleigh, because he knew it was there in 1585. That was the military, and that would be a safe place to stick the civilians and let them live there while they're building their houses and just checking everything over. And he's expecting, of course, that the military colony might be there. These are his actual words. As he's wandering around the island, he goes up to where he knew the fort was, okay, and he says, "We found the fort raised down."
Raised down?
Raised down. Raised as in, if you think R-A or Z, as you guys say, E-D, raised. If something is raised, what is it? It's burnt to the ground. It's leveled. It's gone. Now, if it was a grass bank, would it be raised down? Or would it be raised down if it was a wooden palisade and
I'd say
burnt
the
to the ground?
palisade.
It's a palisade that's been burnt to the ground by the Native American Indians, ultimately.
And by the way, I don't know if I asked you on camera to define palisade for people out there. I know what it is
Sure.
because I had listened.
Palisade is a wooden fort. So if I say to people, think your kind of Wild West cavalry forts, etc., of your westerns, that's essentially a palisade. It's a wooden fort. It would have been defensible. You would have been able to protect yourselves being in that fort. Essentially a wooden castle, if you want to call it that.
Okay. So what document was that again where it said that?
Well, that's actually from the Richard Hakluyt books. That's actually transcribed word for word from the Hakluyt Principal Navigations books that were written in 1589 and 1600. That's verbatim from those books.
Okay.
He finds the fort raised down.
So bottom line, there's significant evidence to point out that Fort Raleigh was really somewhere else, and you think you may have found where that is, but you can't say because you weren't allowed to investigate it.
Yeah.
Interesting. So we had left off 1586.
Right. We
Sir
do need
Francis,
to go there. Yeah.
what's his last name again?
So Francis Drake,
Drake
has
comes up,
relieved the colony in, he's turned up and he's taken the colony, back to England. Now, meanwhile, of course, you have to understand that Grenville is on his way back to England, thinking, because you're only going to get there once a year, because you sail in the spring when the weather's good and you come back before the storms of the autumn. Okay. So Grenville sails back at the end of August 1585. He's left the military colony there. He's gone home. I need to get them more supplies. Well, of course, he's not going to get back to England until October time. So it's the middle of winter. He's going to sail again in the spring of 1586 and come back with supplies for that military colony.
How much how big a boat would he be taking that time? What specific types of supplies and how much weight could he bring over?
These ships actually of the day were pretty extraordinary things. They were incredibly mobile. They sat very high in the water, but they would typically be 100, 200 tons in weight. Just wooden sailing ships, but you could hold quite a bit in those holds. The 3 ships that brought over the Lost Colony, what became the Lost Colony, 3 crews, 120 men, women, and children
total.
Some livestock, and some their goods and stuff that they would have brought with them, food and all the rest of it.
And how long would a journey like that take?
Varies slightly, but the average is about 54 days. So you're talking, what are we talking here, 7 to 8 weeks?
Wow.
Yeah.
And do we have records of people dying on the trip over, or?
We have one record of one of the civilians being killed by the Native American Indians on the Lost Colony in 1587.
Okay, so
But in terms of dying on the way, It's possible, but we don't actually have a record of the civilians dying on the way over. We have two names missing in the list, which doesn't make sense, that they may well have died and it's not been recorded. And we do know that obviously the sailing was pretty dangerous, and we know from some of the voyages that some of the sailors were killed or they died of sickness, essentially, drinking poor, bad water, etc., etc. I would like, actually, at this point, before we get into 1586, to just talk about Grenville's return voyage to England, 1585, because it's the one part of the story that has just been completely missed for its significance. Not so much significance for the Lost Colony, but significance actually for the town of Bideford and for England and what actually took place. On his way back, he gets to Bermuda, and, we're at the time now where if there's a Spanish ship, you would fight with the Spanish ship and try and take the Spanish ship, because it's a prize and it's paid for your trip. Okay, because there's no income tax being used to fund the trips. You're funding the trips yourself.
Oh, even if you're getting a charter from the Queen, you're self-funding. She couldn't throw a couple bones from the throne.
Well, she did sort of provide a couple of ships, which was her cut, of course. But no, there wasn't a limited supply of money. It was basically your money because it was your investment. Because if there was gold and you bought all that gold back, it was basically you'd give the Queen her cut and the rest was yours.
Okay.
So fascinating. I'm sure you're aware of Pirates of the Caribbean. You didn't know we were going to get in. You didn't know we were going to get into Hollywood here, did you? I'm going to read you something. What happened with Grenville? He gets to Bermuda and there's a Spanish ship there. It turns out it's a treasure ship. It's the Santa Maria di San Vincenzi.
Jack Sparrow running it.
Gets better.
I don't like that look.
Okay, gets better. It gets even better. We know what happened because there's this really incredibly unfortunate Spanish guy called Enrique Lopez. He's in the Caribbean doing business or something with, as a Spaniard, and he thumbs a lift back on, to get back to Spain. And the ship he thumbs a lift on, basically, is the Santa Maria di San Vincenzi that gets taken or captured by Grenville at Bermuda, off the coast of Bermuda. With me so far? So we have an eyewitness account. Because this Spaniard gets back to Spain and has to explain what happened to the treasure ship.
Lo siento. It's gone.
Lo siento, yeah, absolutely. Well, definitely a bit of Banos here, I can tell you. So I'm going to read a little, if I may, a little bit of a fascination, Pirates of the Caribbean style here. You might like this, or you can cut it out, of course, guys.
No, we'll keep it. Let's go.
So this is what he wrote. Whereupon the ship, meaning Grenville's ship, opened fire and bore down on us, firing her guns with the intention of disabling our sails or disabling the ship. And it so badly cut up their rigging that we were disabled, meaning that, it shot out the rigging. So you've seen all this on the films, guys.
Yes.
Come on.
Yes.
They say that as the English general, now he's talking about Richard Grenville here, the English general, and his men boarded, he, Richard Grenville, ordered the master and the rest on board to hand over all the gold and silver and other things they had in the vessel, promising that he would not do them any bodily harm if they did so. The passengers gave up the keys to their boxes, and he unlocked some and broke open others and removed lots of gold and silver and pearls which were in them. He also took 200 boxes of sugar, they're about £25 a box, and 7,000 hides and 1,000 hundredweight, which is half a ton, of ginger and other merchandise, to a total value of 160,000 ducats.
Which, I mean, the value sounds insane.
So, to money value today, I'll give it to you in Americanese. What he took off that ship with today's money is $14 million.
Tough day.
Yeah, extraordinary. What there are other things about this incredible moment because.
And Bermuda had been discovered by the Spanish.
Yeah.
Is that what you're getting at?
Yeah.
So they've been there.
Yeah, everyone knew where Bermuda was. Yeah. The crazy thing is the pilot of the Santa Maria di San Vincenzi was Portuguese. Now, Portuguese pilots at the day were the best pilots you could get for your ship.
Why?
Because they knew the Atlantic Ocean intimately well. They were superb navigators. Okay, they were some of the first to go around the world, all that kind of thing. They actually called the Atlantic Ocean the Bay of Portugal. That was kind of an in-joke amongst the Portuguese pilots.
Oh,
They called
so
it
okay,
that, yeah,
all right,
okay.
all right, got it.
So, so of course he's got himself a Portuguese pilot now. So he takes, captures Pedro Diaz, takes him back to England to force him to be his pilot on future journeys, and he does. So he pilots Grenville's resupply voyage in 1586. But what's crazy is he talks about being forced to work on Grenville's new house on the quay, which he's building with the money he's made from that ship. And his story alone is crazy because he goes back in 1586 as the pilot. And then in 1588, he sails again to the Lost Colony. The ships get set upon in the Bay of Biscay. He pleads with the French ship to take him off of the English. They do so and think, oh, we've got ourselves a Portuguese pilot. He then escapes from the French and finally arrives in Havana, Cuba, in the hands of the Spanish 4 years later. It's kind of like, this is straight up Pirates of the Caribbean.
Yes.
This is what I love about this story. It's just so much more things going on that nobody knows about. So, crazy thing. Richard Grenville gets back to Bideford. And there we have that image down there is the house he built on the quayside.
Let's toss this baby up on the screen. Wait, that's in Bideford?
It was. You see the picture of the
lot. Yeah, that looks a lot. Let's toss that up. That's the one on the bottom left.
So I can take you through those briefly, as I say. This
Please,
is all consequence of this this ship he catches off Bermuda.
That looks a lot like, just rough shot quickly, like the boat houses on the Schuylkill River, right outside Philly, past the art museum. Very similar.
Wow.
Architecture design. All right, Alessi's pulling it up right now so people will be able to see it on
Okay,
screen. So bottom left right there.
Right,
You're saying.
so let me take you through what you've got here. First things first, top left, although it's modern and it's now apartments, we got in there and we're investigating that building. It's the remains of an ancient 13th century house, which was where the Grenvilles originally lived in Bideford. And we know this because although you can't see too clearly, the image that's at top centre contains a coat of arms that's linked to the Grenville family.
Okay.
So I tried to save that building as a museum and what have you, but we couldn't raise the money to save it. So it's now apartments. Anyhow, Grenville's got back to Bideford with his ship with all the gold on it. And what he builds is what you see on the bottom left-hand corner there. That six-gabled building is Grenville's manor house that he built on the quayside with the Spanish slaves that he captured. Yeah.
Oh, because he made the guys he captured slaves too.
Absolutely.
Wasn't enough to take all their shit.
They were prisoners of war. I mean, that's how they were viewed. They were slaves, but it was a prisoner of war thing. I mean, the Spanish did the same thing. Any Brits they captured, they incarcerated them as galley slaves. To row ships, basically. So it was
forever.
Basically, until they died or were set free. Yeah, absolutely.
Oh my God.
God,
we live in such a good era.
The problem you've now got, look at the top right, you'll see guys stood there looking very smug and just a load of demolition rubble. In 1937, they pulled down what was left of the Grenville Manor House. It's no longer there. Most astonishing, heartbreaking thing I've ever come across.
Why did they do that? That's before the war. No excuse.
Who knows? I would have started a war if I'd have been there. But yeah, so we lost that building.
Is there similar architecture still existing in Bideford? That's
no. There are. Well, tell a lie. There are some fragments of things, but it's very, very is it for real? Is it not? We don't honestly know. There really is not a lot there. And the last thing was the cannons that you saw at the end there.
Yeah.
There is some debate as to whether those cannons, they're labelled as Spanish Armada cannons. But I have, the Spanish Royal Armoury think that they're earlier. So were they from the Santa Maria San Vincenzi? We really don't know.
Could have been.
So
So the Brits were pirates.
We were pirates. Yeah, absolutely.
God,
you know, guys, we'd do anything for tea.
Hilarious. Can we pull up, hit the home button, Alessi? Hit the home button and then hit that. Can we pull up images of Bideford? I just want to get an idea. Let's just look on like Google what it shows us.
One of the best places in the world to go New Year's Eve.
Bideford.
Really?
Yeah, Bideford. It's a single D. The one in Maine is 2 Ds, and that was actually also founded by someone from.
All right, hit images.
So there we go. There we go.
Okay. Hit that one.
So there you are, Bideford Quayside.
And why did you say it was good for New Year's? Sorry.
We have a very, very big fancy dress party in Bideford on New Year's Eve. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
You got the crier out in front reading you off again?
Well, let me put it this way. About 20 years ago, I can't remember, I think it was the Times newspaper held a poll of the 10 best places to celebrate New Year's Eve in the world. And
in the world,
and we came 7th between Rio de Janeiro and Rome.
Holy shit, man! That's some
pretty crazy.
Yeah, and I'll
Pretty
bet your
crazy.
population's like a quarter or a lot less than Rio.
Absolutely. It's actually a very, very poor town. It's very deprived. About 20% of the people who live there are below the poverty line.
It looks beautiful.
Which is why it frustrates me a bit, because it's a beautiful part of the world. Yeah. And
it's on the west coast, southern west coast.
Down if you head down the peninsula that sticks out from England in the southwest, it's on the north coast there. What's really
we'll pull up a map on the screen so people can see it. So
there we are. There's Bideford. So if you zoom out, you'll see where it is. So there it is. Keep zooming out.
So you're on
and then you're more familiar now where you are in the map of England.
So this is what, like 5 hours from London? 4 hours?
Yeah, actually, no. You could do it in about 5 hours, I think, these days.
Okay.
What's really extraordinary to think is that after Jamestown got settled, Bideford became the principal port for all the tobacco that was being produced in Virginia. Got shipped back to England, and most of it went into Bideford.
Why Bideford?
Because it was the convenient port. It was close at hand.
But hold on a second. Can you zoom back in on that, Alessi, on where Bideford is? But it's technically inland. Like, why wouldn't it zoom in more, if you don't mind? Like, why wouldn't you use Westward Hole or something? Or is that still Bideford there?
No, Westward Ho is it's just a sandy beach. You need a deep water port. The river level at Bideford has the second highest tide after the Bay of Fundy.
But what about the ocean? Can it beat the ocean?
It's silted up quite a bit now from what it was. It used to be wider and deeper, that port.
Yeah, because I always wonder about this. Like, for example, why in America, I really should look this stuff up, but like a major port we had on the South Jersey side is Philadelphia. Mm-hmm. That makes sense because it's a big city, right? Like, it's a huge city, as opposed to making the port like Cape May, because it's much smaller. Yeah. But this seems like it's not like that big a place. And I guess the other places are just like very rural and there's not much going on there.
Yeah, I mean, the population today is 15,000. The population in the time of the Lost Colony would have probably been around 3,000.
Yeah, see, that's not that much. Like,
the most extraordinary thing, though, that so much tobacco was going back into Bideford, and the ships weren't going over empty. They were taking all the mercantile stuff that the colonists in America, in Jamestown and so on, needed, that they couldn't get there. They were taking over linen and all sorts of things and what have you. So perversely, Bideford played a major, major part, not only in trying to settle this first colony, the Lost Colony, but at a later date with the tobacco trade. We played a major part in actually securing America as a nation by bringing it all the merchandise that it actually needed for the colonists to be able to survive and settle.
And we're at this point, like, because we're talking about this initial potential colony, and they didn't even know, they couldn't even grow proper crops. The guys wanted to leave. Did they have any idea maybe not 1585, but by 1590 or something, was there an idea back in England that, whoa, there's a huge tobacco and even like cotton opportunity in America, or was it still a guess?
Right. They were aware of tobacco. because they had just been sort of discovered pretty much then. They found the Spanish were using it. And of course, the Native American Indians were smoking tobacco, a very strong kind of tobacco, but it was noted. But it wasn't really until, after Jamestown was firmly established and they found that the tobacco grew much better in and around Chesapeake Bay, that it really became a major export for the colony.
Outside of smoking, was there any good use for tobacco?
No.
I was going to say, that's like...
It was a fashion.
Okay.
It was literally a fashion. And when it was first brought back to England, it was a very expensive fashion. If you saw some of the clay pipes, the very early clay pipes from when tobacco first came back to England, they were about 3 inches long, and the bowl that you put your tobacco in would barely hold not much more than a thumbnail, because it was so expensive.
Yeah.
And then as it became more and more, got imported and more available, the bowls got bigger, the pipes got bigger. And it got cheaper.
Was there anywhere in the Eastern world where they were previously growing that?
Not that I'm aware of, although I must admit it's not something I would know.
Not in the Middle East or anything?
It's not something I would know, to be honest with you. I don't think so. I think there's various species of tobacco leaf, but the tobacco leaf that was cultivated here was kind of seen as the major player. Excuse me. The sad thing about Bideford was that when we talk about the price of tea and you guys throwing it in the harbour, as we did a minute ago.
That's right.
It wasn't really England that suffered from that loss. It was Bideford, because you stopped exporting all your tobacco back to Bideford, and literally overnight Bideford collapsed as a port.
Sorry, pal.
So you owe us, guys. You owe us big,
There were only 3,000 of you. It's a write-off cost. I'm sorry.
Guys,
it just is,
guys.
It's a big country.
We had this guy called Strachan Carnegie, who was mayor of Bideford in 1910, and
What a name!
His nephew was Andrew Carnegie.
But
and
wait,
Andrew
Andrew's
Carnegie gave Bideford its library.
Wasn't he Scottish though?
Yeah, originally, and then he went to America and then got involved in something called
But
steel.
Bideford's
didn't he?
not in Scotland.
No, but his
family
uncle
there?
was mayor of Bideford, and he persuaded Andrew Carnegie to give us a new library. Now,
This is crazy. Until I talked to you, I didn't even know what Bideford was. Never heard of it in my life.
crazy little town, because you go there,
Yes.
it's very sleepy backwater, it's kind of twee, it's kind of quaint, it's got some really lovely little places there, but it's kind of like, oh, guys, So I digress. That's the story of Bideford.
No, it's great. It's good digression.
But it's kind of like trying to give people a feel for where it all started, what really was kicking off with the Lost Colony. It was all focused around Bideford, really. That's really where most of it actually, the story took place. And we have further references as we go forward. So 1586, when now Grenville is now back in England. He knows he needs to resupply the colony. So on 16th of April, he set sail with some supplies and more people, more military people. And then something crazy happens. Right at the entrance to the estuary where Bideford sits, there's a very large sandbar, still there today. It still causes problems for ships. And the town clerk of the neighbouring town of Barnstable quotes, and I got this quote from the 16th of April, Sir Richard Grenville sailed over the bar with his flyboat, this is his ship, and frigate, but for want of sufficient water on the bar, being near upon Neap, he left his ship, meaning the ship got stranded on the sandbar. And
The whole thing.
His ship got stranded on the sandbar because he was laden down, I guess, and miscalculated the sandbar.
They couldn't just wait for the tide to come in?
Well, that's what he had to do, but he waited nearly 2 weeks. So here's the crazy thing. This is really what if only kind of thing. Drake has taken the military colony off. Grenville is on his way back, but gets stranded on the sandbar, and he's stuck there 2 weeks. Okay? When Grenville gets back to Roanoke, he arrives at Roanoke 2 weeks after Drake left. So what we're saying here, if he hadn't have got stuck on the sandbar, he might well have arrived when Drake was there, or when the military colony was still on the island. Because Drake left and then Grenville arrived 2 weeks later. But Grenville was
I
stranded
got
in
you now.
Bideford on the bar for 2 weeks. If he'd have
Okay.
sailed when he originally planned and hadn't landed,
He
got
would've
stuck on
gotten
the
there.
sandbar, he would have probably been there in time.
To stop them from getting on with Drake.
Yeah, and he would have had supplies, and then they would have stayed.
Okay, but they didn't.
They didn't because he didn't arrive. He wasn't there. He arrived 2 weeks after Drake left with the military colony.
And no one's left, and he doesn't know that Drake got them.
He doesn't know. Isn't that a crazy story?
It's crazy, but now I'm trying to put it all together again. He arrives, though, with the 140 people or so.
No. He's arrived with a supply,
That's
more
it.
supplies for the military colony.
That's it.
Yeah. Really, really interesting point here that two things occur. Grenville meets, obviously, with Manteo and the Native American Indians and finds out that Drake has just left with his colony.
Because they came back. So they brought the Manteo, is that how you say it?
No,
Manteo.
Manteo and Wanchese came back to England with Amadis and Barlow in 1584, returned in 1585
Yes.
with Grenville. They are now back in
Stayed.
native, staying there in the Outer Banks. And of course, because Manio speaks perfect English by now, he's telling Grenville, this guy called Francis Drake came along and took them all away 2 weeks ago.
Okay, so they know that happened.
So they know that happened. He then talks about they found an Englishman and an Indian who had been hanged. And they found 3 natives who tried to have a fight with Grenville. These weren't the friendly natives. These were some of the mainland natives that were kind of,
Are they still Croatoan?
Probably. It looks like there were different factions at some point. Anyway, my point is that he captures one of them. He captures one of these Native American Indians. So we've now got a 3rd Native American Indian that's in the possession of the English. Right?
And this is now in 1587,
1586.
86, when Grenville has now returned and they're gone.
Right. So he's back on Roanoke Island. He finds out from Manteo that Drake has picked them all up. But while he's there, there's a skirmish with some more Native Americans, from the mainland. It's a different faction, a different tribe. And they capture one of these Native Americans from this tribe. The other thing he does is he decides to leave 15 men with enough supplies for a year to hold America while he goes back
To hold
and
the whole
gets them-
thing.
to hold the whole country. So there you go. We trust the entire United States of America to 15 guys.
I thought you guys were bright. You know, I was giving you too much credit.
Yeah. Bright or brave? I mean, or just. I prefer the term ambitious. I mean, come on, guys. You know, the British Isles are as a land area are the same land area as the state of Virginia and North Carolina combined, and yet we went on to rule a third of the world.
Fair enough.
You can't make up stuff like that, you know.
You did lose it, but still.
Well, we know how we ruled the world. We just turned up with a flag. No one else had a flag. We just stuck a flag in India and like, oh God, they got a flag. They must own us.
That is
You know,
it.
That's how we did it.
Crazy.
So anyway, so he's left 15 men, and of course he's come back with one Native American from his 1586
Kicking and
supply.
screaming. This
Kicking
guy
and
he
screaming.
captured.
Yep. So guess what? That Native American becomes anglicised, just like Wanchese and Manio. We don't know his name, but we do know he was christened in St Mary's Parish Church in Bideford.
All right, let's pull this up. How did you get that record right there?
It's in our parish records in Bideford. It's actually
What's his name listed as?
Rawley. I'll show you. I'll walk you through this when we've got it up there.
His name's Rawley.
Rawley. Yeah, he's named after Sir Walter Raleigh.
Okay.
Okay.
Got
See,
it.
there we go.
I had it off. Hold on. I'll go back. Hit this. Okay, so this is the document right here.
Right. So this is his Native American that Grenville's brought back in 1586, and you'll see in 1588. You'll see Raleigh written there. And the entry says Raleigh, a Winganditoan. I can tell you about the Winganditoan thing in a minute. Richard, the son of Baptist Hooker, and Catherine, the daughter of William Berry, all were christened this 27th day of March. So this is the first American to be basically christened in England. But in 1589, on the 2nd of April, he dies.
Quick.
So that Native American Indian is buried in our parish church in Bideford.
How old was he when he got Christian?
We don't know. Now, there is a problem because we don't know where he's buried in the church.
Can't we just exhume it?
We don't know where he is.
But it's like a church. It's not like a country.
You could dig up the whole churchyard if you want.
Yeah, can't we do that?
Well, you could, but, you know, when the plague hit and all that in the 1660s, there's probably a lot of plague burials in the churchyard. I mean, you guys are welcome to do it. I mean, I'll stand back and watch, you know. But...
All right, really dumb question. That's still contagious 500 years later?
Oh, yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
That never goes away?
If they find a plague victims in England, you know, they're suited and booted and like they're dealing with radiation.
Really?
Oh, yeah, very serious.
So that bacteria, wow.
Yeah, that bacteria will thrive. It will still live.
So maybe he died of plague.
Well, we think more likely influenza because very sadly, it also killed Grenville's youngest daughter, Rebecca. You know, she's in the records. But I thought you'd be interested in that because this is what happened to the Native American Indian that Grenville brings back in 1586. He's christened in St. Mary's Church, which is still standing, thankfully. And he dies and he's buried in that churchyard somewhere, but we don't know where.
I'm just impressed you guys can read this shit. I have no idea what that said. I have horrible handwriting. Let's just make that clear. This makes me feel good.
We're just making it up, really, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I could. That's what I'm saying. Maybe this guy just like invented a PowerPoint and brought it up to Jersey. I don't know.
So, what I wanted to point out here, by the way, you see it says Raleigh and Winganditoan, okay?
Yes.
And you'll notice the
Yes.
two entries say Raleigh spelt one way and then Rawley spelt another way on his death. So you see the two different spellings. Well, this is because at this time, you wrote down how something sounded. So you wrote phonetically. So that's why the spellings can vary because it's how someone interprets what the word actually is, so how it's written.
So someone with a London version of the accent and someone with a Scottish version of the accent could say the same word and it sounds a little different, so they just write what they hear.
Absolutely right. It would be completely different.
Okay.
So Winganditoan, I have to tell you the Winganditoan. There's a little bit of light relief here. Thomas Harriot was part of the 1585 voyage. Okay, now he was a mathematician, he was kind of a science man, a philosopher, all sorts of things. And part of his job was to translate the Croatoan language, try and find, you know, work out how to speak Croatoan back to them and also translate their language. And one of the very first times that they speak with the Croatoans, they asked the Croatoans, what's the name of this place, Roanoke Island? And the reply is Winganditoa. But Thomas Harriot later discovers, well, no, the island is called Roanoke, and Winganditoa means you've got nice clothes.
So so they just totally messed up what they were. Got it.
Yeah, the Croatoan was looking at them saying, "You've got nice clothes, guys."
Yeah.
You know?
He's like, "Oh, that's what it's called."
Yeah, that's what it's called. So that's that. So a little bit of humour there. But the story of Rawley the Winganditoan, buried in Bideford's church, the first American buried on English soil.
That's crazy. And we don't know anything else about him, and we can't dig up his body because we might die.
Yeah.
Well, after COVID, we got to have some people go down there, right? Let's suit up. Let's get some rubber gloves on. Let's call it a day. I gotta look that up. I had no idea that shit still lasts. Like you can't even dig up a.
I hadn't know that either.
That's scary.
Yeah,
okay,
yeah,
so
guys.
where we are on the story here
Right,
is that
so back to the
Grenville's
story.
2 weeks behind.
Right. I know I'm kind of jumping around
No,
a
it's
bit,
good.
but there's all
keep it
these
straight.
consequences, which to me is why it's such a crazy story.
Yeah.
You know, there's so much more to this story than has ever been really properly recorded. We now come to the interesting bit, the Lost Colony. We finally get there,
Yes.
guys. Okay.
Oh, here you go.
Thank you.
And this is where the whole argument's over.
This is where the story really starts. Okay. So first things first, you know, one of the big things that has been said to me is that the colonists were criminals. They were thieves, you know, because Raleigh set out to try and find 250 people to start the colony with, but he only got about 120. So they were rather naive. Thomas Harriot, the guy I've just mentioned, he writes this piece about the sort of people they want for the job, you know. So to give you a picture of who these colonists actually were, what they were, millwrights, these, sawyers, carpenters for buildings, blacksmiths.
What's a millwright?
Millwright, someone who would build a mill so that you could make flour, you could mill flour. Tile makers, brick makers, thatchers who built, roofs, thatching roofs. Barbers who in those days were surgeons.
Barbers were surgeons?
That's what they originally were, yeah. Legend of Sweeney Todd and all that guys,
I'm really glad that our barbers aren't surgeons. That's all I'm saying.
yeah. I've seen the haircuts, guys, know.
I'm still recovering from 3.5 months. That's a take I have. Salons over barbershops for me. I'm sorry. Every time I go to a barbershop, they fuck it up.
See, I don't have to worry about it, guys.
Yeah, you're good.
Tailors, cooks, bakers, brewers, butchers, shoemakers. So the list goes on and on of all these trades Thomas Harriot thinks we need to. So it's kind of like it's like a recruitment drive. They sat there like, who do we know who is a good hunter, or who can make potash or soap, or who's a good tailor, who's a good cook, etc. All these people.
Is this in like the town newspaper they're putting this in, or?
Well, it's more likely that. When Richard Grenville went back we know he went to London and sat down with Walter Raleigh to go through this list with Thomas Harriot, and then they would have sat there with the other investors and said, okay, anyone got a good cook? Anyone got someone who's a good brickmaker? Anyone who's got someone who can, sink a well and find water, etc. So
I think real fast, I think you might have touched this earlier. I just can't remember if it was off camera or on. So just quickly, what was Walter Raleigh's background again?
Okay, so Walter Raleigh was one of Queen Elizabeth's privateers, a kind of inner circle, if you like. They were kind of official, unofficial pirates. Drake, Grenville, Raleigh, they were all in that privateer group. Excuse me. Sorry, guys. Live as it happens, right?
That's all
but he was a favourite of Queen Elizabeth, so he was able to wangle his way into getting all sorts of favours and what have you. So he rose through the ranks very, very quickly.
Okay.
And so that is his kind of background.
Okay, so he and Grenville and these other guys you were saying are sitting around trying to figure out who can do what, and they're basically like trying to make their Ocean's 11 to go to America.
Ocean's 11, absolutely. And of course, these are not going to be criminals. Think about this. If you're going to spend your money, not taxpayers' money here, it's not like it's not accountable. This is accountable because it's your money. You're going to spend your money setting up a colony, which you hope to make money from, and it's 4,000 miles away, and you're only going to get there once a year to find out how it's going, okay? You're not going to send criminals or people you can't trust. You're going to send the best men you can lay your hands on for that job. So this is why they were not criminals. These were good, honest people who almost certainly worked for the people who were the investors to the colony.
Well, how do we explain Australia then? I mean, that's far away. Didn't they send like a lot of criminals to Australia?
Yeah, they did. They sent some of my ancestors there because they stole a loaf of bread to feed the family.
And they sent them to Australia.
And sent them to Australia. Well, they used to send them to Georgia, but you guys got fed up with the price of tea, and then we ended up sending them to Australia. And Australia is very grateful, by the way. So,
We got a lot of Australian fans out there.
Very, very grateful,
None of them seem like criminals. I just want to say that. You guys seem like upstanding citizens. I'm just going through history here. But you believe that it's different in this case. They really, I guess, because it's like the earliest exploration, they want to make sure they actually have people who can set up civilization.
Yeah, I mean, and the research, because we know the names of all the lost colonists. We know who went. We know their names. We've been able to identify some of them back in where they lived in England and who they were connected to. So it's very, very obvious that the people who were putting money into this colony were the people choosing the people who went to represent them for their interest, represent their interest perhaps, but also to play their part in this colony to make sure it succeeded. So, I want to make that very clear. These people were not criminals. These were people that were considered to be professionals, if you
Yes.
like. Perfect case in point. I'm sure you're aware of Ananias Dare and Eleanor Dare and their daughter Virginia Dare,
Yes.
firstborn American. Well, Ananias Dare was a brickmaker. So, this is the thing. It was people that they trusted. I'll come on to those guys in a minute. So anyway, the Lost Colony sails for Roanoke early in 1587. A couple of things happen. A bit of misadventure. They eat some poisonous fruit while they're in the Caribbean, and it causes a few issues. They find what they think is water, but it's not. It's actually where oil has seeped into the water.
Yikes.
And so they've been drinking that, and it talks about how they were burning their throat and their face because they washed their face in petroleum, basically. So all this misadventure goes on, so
Don't
it's
light a
pretty
match.
ropey.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But here's the point. They get to Roanoke, and Simon Fernando, who's in charge of getting them to Roanoke, says, I haven't got any time to get you to Chesapeake Bay, so I'm going to leave you at Roanoke where you were. Now, I know that sounds slightly a weird thing. Why did he say that? But here's the point. They knew when they sailed in 1587 that they were supposed to have left those colonists not on Roanoke, but in Chesapeake Bay.
Yes, right.
Because they knew the Native American, the military colony from 2 years earlier had now got back to England and reported that Indians are friendly in Chesapeake Bay. There's deep water anchorage. There's plenty of room. There's some nice soil for crops. It's a little bit more, better quality of life up there in terms of what's available to them to make a go of it, etc. You have to ask the question, when they set up Jamestown in 1607, did they actually take all what was told, that report, and say, well, that's where we're meant to go? If they knew that the Lost Colony was supposed to go there in 1587, that's why they went there in 1607, because it was still the best place to go. And we know that they were dumped on Roanoke Island, by the way, this is another thing that people question. How did they know they were supposed to be going to Chesapeake Bay? Well, John White records, and this is in black and white in the annals. Excuse me. We passed along the coast to the bay. We were supposed to go along the bay to Chesapeake, where we intended to make our seat and fort according to the charge given us, among other directions in writing, under the hand of Sir Walter Raleigh. So, intended to Chesapeake Bay, we were intended to make our seat and fort. He's confirming that they were supposed to go to Chesapeake Bay.
But you're saying they
got
didn't.
dumped at Roanoke because Simon Fernando said he didn't have time to take them to Chesapeake Bay. So if you
Convenient.
think about it, there is a bit of conspiracy. Did Simon Fernando, was he acting for Spain as a bit of a spy and dumping these people on Roanoke? But I don't know. I'm not sure about that. I really am not.
And what months would that be alleged to have happened?
This happened in August 87.
Okay.
So it is quite late. They did arrive quite late. There's no doubt about that. So he didn't have a lot of time to get back to England. But we know that some of the return voyages left at the end of August. So he certainly did have time to probably get to Chesapeake Bay and pick up the Gulf Stream back to England.
Okay. So back to Roanoke, though. This is where we get into the evidence of whether or not they were there and whatever.
Right.
What, outside of some of your equivalent of FOIA over in the UK, what evidence on the ground says that they stopped in Roanoke and dropped off many of these people to set up a colony?
Because it's in the writings of Hakluyt, his Principal Navigations. What is in there is John White's own transcript of arriving on Roanoke, finding
In 1587.
In 1587, bearing in mind he's been there 2 years previous.
Yes.
So again, he's expecting the fort. He finds the fort raised down. Remember I was saying that about he finds it raised down. He talks about them finding the houses were still there, so they repaired the houses and they set up camp again. They get themselves organised. He talks about that. He also records the birth of his granddaughter, Virginia Dare, who becomes the firstborn American, and her birthday was 18th of August, 1587. So this is John White recording all of this. This is his deposition, if you like. This is his story.
And like you said, we have the name of every passenger.
We have the
who was
name
on
of every
there.
passenger.
What's the mix of like men and women and children?
Well, very lopsided. There were 85 men. Now, you have to say that you have to look at that and say, well, some of those were military men. Some of those were would have been sailors. And then you've got the others who might have brought their families with them. Virginia Dare was not the only child. Certainly the firstborn, excuse me, but not the only child. There were other children. How old they were, we don't know. They might have been anywhere between about 5 and 15.
Okay.
So there were several others. But I have the marriage record of Ananias Dare with Eleanor White. We know that they were married in London on the 24th of June, 1583. And then say they sail for, to be part of that colony with Eleanor's father, John White.
And John White is at the center of the story because he's the one who, after this voyage in and around the area of arriving August 1587, he goes back to England to go get supply.
Absolutely right. Yeah, absolutely right. We don't know much about John White either. We think he was probably Cornish. He trained as a painter in London. Okay. We know he got married to Thomasine Cooper on 30th of June, 1566. His son Thomas was christened 1567. Daughter Eleanor in 1568. His son dies the same year. So that just leaves him with a daughter. So his only surviving child, is his daughter Eleanor, who he last sees alive in 1587. And I don't know if you want this record.
Sure,
but
please.
That record is the record of the birth of Eleanor.
And what day was she born again?
I've got it on there somewhere. Sorry, I'll need to.
We're going back and forth with the HDMI today. I love it.
I do apologize.
No, it's good. It's good. That way we can get it up so that people at home can follow. All right. Thanks everyone. Sorry, we were having trouble getting that up for a second. So here we go. This is the record of Eleanor being born on May 9th, 1568. Is that right?
Yep. It's the third line down there. It says the 9th day of May, christened Eleanor, the daughter of John White. And if you look at the faint writing on the right-hand side, the word painter, confirming that is the John White and that is the birth record of Eleanor.
Is this also in your church?
No, this is in the registers in London where they lived.
Okay. Wow.
Hey guys, if you haven't already, please make sure you go subscribe to our other channels here on YouTube to support the show. We are posting different daily content on Julian Dorey clips, Best of JDP, and Julian Dorey daily every day, including mid-form and short-form clips. So if you haven't already subscribed to those, please go subscribe by hitting the links in my description below. Thank you.
All right, so how long after that does White decide to go back? So we established this his daughter and everything. She's there. She's a part of the people who they allegedly left at Roanoke, but then he decides to go back to England. And who does he take with him when he does that?
Okay. He decides he's going to go back alone, or they persuade him that he's going back alone because, and I can see the logic. If you think about this, he was set up to be the governor, the leader of the colony. Is anyone back in England going to believe one of the colonists if they turn up and say, we can't build a colony there because there's no materials, there's no fields, there's no nothing, it's a sandbank? Because you've got to bear in mind that these people were employees, if you like,
yes.
Of the landowners, the landed gentry. They're not going to be believed if they come back with this story. They're going to think that, the landed gentry, their bosses are going to think, they're just ducking out of this and what have you. So they persuade John White to go back to represent them and say, we need more supplies, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They're pretty well set where they are, but they realise that, they're going, they can't survive that long where they are because it's just not, it's not the land of milk and honey that it was originally portrayed to be. And of course, we also have to bear in mind that Grenville's 15 men, by this time, by the way, have also disappeared. When they arrive in 1587, they're expecting to find Grenville's 15 men. They're not there either. He does find out from these are the 15 men that Grenville left to hold all of America.
Yes,
Okay.
but they were am I getting this mixed up? They were the ones who went back with Sir Francis Drake.
No. Clarification. Say it's a complicated story.
Yes.
1586, Drake arrives and removes the military colony. They take a lift back. Grenville arrives 2 weeks later in 1586,
Yes.
finds they've gone, leaves 15 men to hold the whole of America.
That's right.
Okay. When John White arrives with the colony in 1587, Grenville's 15 men have disappeared. So he asks Manteo what happened to Grenville's men, and Manteo gives him this story about them being set upon by Indians from the mainland, and that they got in a boat and rowed off and vanished, and no one knows where they went either. So at this point, we've got 104 men come back to England. We've got 15 men already lost on the Outer Banks. Then the colony turns up there with John White, and after 3 weeks, he decides to sail back to England because they need more supplies. And that was the last time anyone saw the 120 colonists alive. So we're up to about 135 people missing at this point.
Okay.
So 1587, he comes back to England.
What, like October-ish, something like
Yeah,
that?
about that. It's quite an extraordinary story, and it does define why I think Simon Fernando, the pilot, that he blames for not leaving them at Chesapeake Bay like he was commanded to, was just a bad sailor, because their journey back is pretty horrendous. They don't land in England, they land in Ireland, and then he has to get another ship back to England, and some of the men have died of sickness on board. So John White's return voyage is pretty horrendous. The fact that he got back alive is something of a miracle in itself.
And he wrote about this. That's how we
He
know
wrote
about it.
all about this. This is all in the Hakluyt writings. So he gets back to England, meets up with Grenville and Raleigh, and it's not recorded what was said, but I can imagine it was probably an entertaining conversation. Why are you back here? I thought we left you over there, kind of thing. But he does persuade them that they need more supplies. You'd have to argue that Grenville probably agreed with him because he'd already tried to supply the military colony. So he knew the terrain. He knew that there was not a lot there. So in 1588, there is an attempt to resupply the planters' colony, what became the Lost Colony.
Okay.
Okay. We have an extraordinary record of this attempt in that Richard Grenville has at Bideford 5 ships fully laden with supplies, including another 15 potential colonists, 11 men and 4 women, to add to the colony. Okay, this is all documented. And they're about to sail, and then something happens which changes the course of history. The Spanish Armada arrives. 1588, the Spanish Armada arrives.
Where?
It's sailing up the English Channel to attack England once and for all.
Wait, to go to war back in Europe, you're talking?
To go to war with England, actually try and take England, basically. So Elizabeth says we need every able-bodied man, every able-bodied ship, every ship capable of a good fight, quote unquote, to take on the Spanish Armada and save the nation. So Grenville has no choice, but the 5 ships that he's got left at Bideford Quay ready to go back to Roanoke can't go back to Roanoke because 3 of them are big ships. They can capable of good fight. So he has to take them to meet up with the English fleet to try and defeat the Spanish Armada. However, that did leave him 2 small ships, the 2 smallest ships of the 5 that he's got ready. And John White is on board one of those 2 remaining ships. Now, these are very small ships. These are like 30 and 50 tons, so they're really quite tiny ships. And then he records their story. But what happens is they get into the Bay of Biscay, which is off the coast of France, between France and Spain, and one of the captains picks a fight with a French ship, and that doesn't go very well.
With a French ship.
With a French ship, because you can see it today, guys. England doesn't get on with Spain or France. We've been at war with them for 700 years,
But there's a lot of French who spend time in England. There's a lot of English who spend a lot of time in France.
Absolutely.
It's interesting.
Have you not heard about entente cordiale? It's a French term, and it means basically that you're smiling at the person, shaking hands, and with your other hand, you're stabbing the knife in the back.
California.
California, right? Okay. What is it with California? I loved San Francisco when I was there. I really loved it.
Shots fired.
But no, so anyway, in the Bay of Biscay, picks a fight with the wrong ship, loses badly. They escape with their lives. But, of course, they're wounded, and there's a great sort of piece, and I've got it on the laptop. There's a great little quote about the fight. So if you want some blood and gore, I've got a nice quote that you can throw in about that fight.
How far off?
No, go forward. All right, a bit more. Keep going.
We got this up on the third camera for people watching it.
Right, okay.
Past
so
John
a little
White,
more. Yeah,
more.
we'll come back to him. Keep going.
More.
No, you're going.
There's that map we looked at.
You're going forward. You need to go. That's it. Keep going down.
All you historians are so organized. With
we are. Okay,
your
keep going.
PowerPoints,
Keep going.
the
Keep
hidden
going.
fort.
Keep going. A bit more.
Boom.
Bit more.
We're almost there. I can
Next
feel
one.
it.
Right. Bit more. Bit more. Next one. Oh, there we are. Now, so they have this fight, and there's the quote on the bottom. Our master and his mate were deadly wounded, so that they were not able to come forth of their beds. I myself was wounded twice in the head, once with a sword and another time with a pike, and hurt also in the side of the buttocks with a shot. 3 of our passengers were also, or hurt also, whereof one had 10 or 12 wounds. Our master hurt in the face with a pike and thrust quite through the head.
What is a pike? The thing with the spikes?
Absolutely right. Yeah.
He lived.
And he lived.
He got hit with one of those things and lived.
Absolutely. So, I mean, this is, crazy stuff, but there it is in black and white. That is John White's actual words of the fight that took place on their ship in the Bay of Biscay. So, so of course it's a failure. He ends back sort of, escaping with their lives back to England. So nobody goes back to the colony in 1588. Or so we thought until very recently.
And what changed?
Well, I think it might be the next slide.
The
Yes.
Mystery of Red
Right.
Leon.
Okay. World exclusive for you, Julian.
Love that.
World
That's
exclusive.
why you're here.
Okay, world exclusive. It was a couple of years back now. My colleague, David Carter, was looking through what we call the port books. Now, the port books record ships coming and going. They don't record people because people are just stowage. There's no money in people. What they do is record the goods that they have on board because that's where the taxes come from and all that. So that's why we have these port books. They're very fragmented. There's years missing that I wish we had because that would add more to the story. But we do have this record, rather mysterious record from the 3rd of October, 1588. Now, this is the year that the 2 ships that John White was on got to the Bay of Biscay, escaped with their lives.
Yes.
Okay. All the records say that was the only attempt to get back to Roanoke in 1588. We may not have been so because this record, these 2 entries that you can see here, basically you can see it on both of them. They both start with it's Latin, so the interdict basically is saying incoming. And then you'll see of Terra Nova. You see those words there? That's the 3rd and 4th letter along. 3rd and 4th letter along.
Oh, yes,
Terra
I see it.
Nova.
Yeah.
Okay. Terra
Looks
Nova.
like Fora Mona from here.
Right. Terra Nova, New World. It's what they called America. The New World.
No shit.
So, and the first ship is the Red Lion. You can see the words there, Red Lion. I'm sure if you read, you got Terra Nova, and then next word, and then you got Red Lion. Okay. Of Bideford. okay? And it then names the captain as Gabriel King. And the entry below is for the ship called the Fortune. You can probably see Fortune. It looks like it's got two F's at the start there. There it is, of Bideford. And the captain there was Christopher Beale, who incidentally, his brother Valentine was one of the original military colony people.
Mm.
The Red Lion is really interesting because the Red Lion was involved in the 1585 voyage that Grenville took over. It was also involved in the resupply mission of 1586. So we have a ship
It's got a
with
pattern
a crew that knows its way back to Roanoke Island. But we have no record of whether they made it back.
Did they write the words in any of these passages that we find Roanoke?
No, this is not in Hakluyt. This is not in any other record that we know of. This is a unique recording in the port book of these two ships coming back from the New World.
And this is 1588.
Yeah. Now, what we think was going on here is we think these two ships were part of the ships that Grenville had to send to fight the Spanish Armada. And when it was evident that they weren't needed, they then basically sloped off or sneaked off. Take a trip off to Roanoke. And that. Now, we've no idea whether they made it there because we don't know. Obviously, they didn't come back with a load of colonists on board. Otherwise, the world would have known about it.
Would they for sure have written that?
I'm absolutely sure of that because, why would John White go back in 1590 to go and find his daughter and the colonists?
What if vacation goers didn't tell him that they skipped a little Misherooney and went over to America for a trip?
Oh, no, come on. No.
Just saying.
No. Not really. I mean, why would John White risk his life in 1590 to go back and find them? And when you read his letter to Richard Hakluyt when he records his voyage of 1590, which we'll come on to, he sends that in to Richard Hakluyt, the guy writing the books, writing the annuals, with an accompanying letter. And we have that letter. And it really laments about leaving his daughter out there, abandoned, lost in that colony. There is no way on this planet that in a relatively small nation like this, that John White would have gone back if his daughter and husband had made it back to England. Absolutely no way on this planet.
Not one way? Not even one?
No, 100% not. 100%.
Do historians argue that there would have been a way?
We would have known if those colonists had made it back to England. It makes no sense that John White would have gone in 1590. It makes no sense that there would have been several other attempts afterwards that are just vaguely documented. They're not noted in any great detail. It makes no sense that the following year that Sir Walter Raleigh has to sells his charter because he thinks the whole project's dead.
Mm.
So, and these ships are arriving in Bideford, where some of the colonists came from in the first place. So
back up one sec. You could sell your charter. Yeah. So the Queen gives you a charter and you could just walk out on the street and be like, highest bidder, let's go.
Yeah. Walter Raleigh sold his charter to a group of London merchantmen.
And how would they know it was a real charter and not like a fake one?
Because in those days, if you did something like that, it'd be off with your head.
Yeah, but what if what if I had Matt Cox and he's like a great forger and he's got a fine arts degree and he can draw the
guys. Come on, Julian.
You couldn't do that?
No, come on, Julian.
You guys are too good for that over there?
We're getting into alien abductions here, guys, and you know what I said about that.
All right, but this is interesting that this went back.
Yeah, we would have known. Now, we've got no hard evidence that they actually physically even found Roanoke Island, that they knew exactly where they're going. We're pretty sure that they must have known where it was and how to get there. But it doesn't tell us any more than that they went to, they were returning from Terra Nova. And you'll notice there that the very bottom line on both those entries says Richard Grenville Miles. Miles is the Latin for military. So these two ships belonged to Richard Grenville, And they are saying that those ships belong to Richard Grenville. That's actually recording that.
And because they're the same ones with a lot of the same crew that went in 85 and 86 or 84 and 86, whatever it was, it's reason to believe that they would have sailed in the exact same direction.
Yeah.
Because that's what they know, and they would have ended up at this spot. And even though they don't use the word Roanoke, that's exactly where they would have gone.
Yeah. I suspect that's the case.
Okay. And allegedly, if that's the case, and they returned, unless they were so... Let's say they showed up and they saw a bunch of people's heads on pikes and they just, like, went the other way and were so traumatized by it that they decided never to tell anyone what they saw. I guess that's a possibility. But at the very least, they definitely didn't return with any colonists, and they didn't tell anyone that exactly where they had been in these writings.
Yeah. You've got to bear in mind, these two ships came back to Bideford, population 3,000 to 4,000 people. Okay. If a ship had arrived with up to half the people being locals, they would have known about it. It would have been everywhere. The other point to make is there is no records of any of those lost colonists dying in England in our burial records for the parish records. There would have been names that we would have said, hang on a sec, wasn't that someone who was part of the Lost Colony or whatever? And, and here they are. Not one.
And there's not one in... Have you checked other records across the country? Because maybe they returned and went somewhere else?
Well, it's possible, but I seriously doubt it. I mean, these were people that were employed by the investors of the colony. So you've got to bear in mind, let's say there were 20 investors in the colony. There were certainly at least a dozen, okay? They would have returned to those people, and what do you think would have happened? You'd go home... Your boss has just spent Lord knows how much money on you setting up that colony, and you turn up on the front doorstep. Yeah, no.
Yeah, it gets weird.
Yeah, there's just too many improbabilities about this to be anything other than that was an attempt to find them. Now, leaves a lot of questions open. The biggest question it leaves open to me is, did they actually get to Roanoke? Because all we've got there is the captain's record saying, yeah, I got to Terra Nova, It doesn't say Roanoke Island, it just says Terra Nova.
Yes.
So it is still a little bit supposition. You'd be like, did they actually get to Roanoke? Or is it just, would they sail up and down the coast to see if they could see anyone?
So they're just a giant mystery that you guys have discovered in the middle of this.
We don't even, for all we know, they might have actually sailed and gone to Chesapeake Bay because they knew that's where they were supposed to be. They might not have known, if they didn't, if they set off at the same time as the Brave and the Roe did, John White's trip in 1588. Yeah, there's a lots of ifs, ands and buts about it, but I think we can be very, very confident that if they had found those colonists, we would have known about it. And above all, John White would never have gone back in 1590.
But John does go back in 1590, as you said. Yeah. So now that the Spanish Armada, that stuff's done, he has his charter. He goes back to the colony again. His daughter, Eleanor, was her name?
Eleanor, yeah.
Eleanor's there. And he's expecting to find, 120, 140 people, whatever it was.
Right.
And what happens when he goes back?
So he goes back and he finds nothing. There's no sign of them.
No sign of life.
It's very, very interesting. He talks about the houses all being taken down. Now, these houses were built out of wattle and daub, and I can kind of cover a little bit about that. Wattle and daub. I can explain that a little bit on one of the other slides about how they, what they would have lived in and what they would have had. But basically, he goes back and he finds, and this is his words. He says, "We found the houses taken down, and the place," and this is a punchline, "and the place very strongly enclosed with a high palisade of great trees with courtines and flankers, very fort-like. And one of the chief trees or posts on the right side of the entrance had the bark taken off, and 5 foot from the ground, in fair capital letters, was graven or engraved, Croatoan, without any cross or sign of distress." Now, that's a really important passage. And let me run that through, run that by you again. So he gets back to Roanoke, no sign of the colonists. He goes to where the houses were, and he says, and he notes that we found the houses taken down. So that's not burnt to the ground, that's systematically dismantled. Now, these houses of wattle and daub, it's kind of like a way you can make it's like a prefab house. That's the easiest way for me to describe it. You could take these things apart, almost modular panels, and put them back up again.
Is it wood?
Okay. Usually, yeah, it's basically like hazel twigs or something like that. The daub is made out of crushed seashells and lime and what have you to make it, and then you use like thatching, like reeds on top.
What's this called again, Alessi? Let's see if we can pull this out.
Wattle and daub. It's Wattle, and the word daub is Daub. So wattle and daub.
Wattle and daub.
Yeah.
Such a British sounding name once again. Very classy. Wattle and daub.
Wattle and daub.
Yeah.
So let's see what you can find. There we go. Wattle and daub.
Okay, images. Oh,
so these look very fancy, but I would draw your attention to the more basic ones that show how it was actually made. But you can see these very simple houses on the you see on the right hand side there. Those top first, especially that first couple of images there. That's very typical of the sort of thing that would have been produced. Now, this one is actually in Mississippi, as you can see there. So it's Mississippi period house, but it's not that dissimilar from the kind of place that they would have built.
Can you click the one, Alessi, down at the bottom middle, the orange one? Yeah. Do that one. That's fine. Is that like plywood there on that? I guess that's like a new one.
You would probably use pieces of tree to form like a gate, doorway, like you have a lintel over a doorway to stop the roof from collapsing in and so on.
So it's essentially, you could basically lift the roof off the way it's built, and then you could take each of the side panels and push them down to the ground.
The roof is reeds, so you just gather up the reeds and untie them all, because they would just be in by
falls
stage.
like a cardboard box.
It's a flat
almost.
pack.
Yeah. I'm trying to think, maybe my photographic memories misremembering some of this right now. I feel like, you ever seen the movie The Patriot?
Yeah.
So the part, like almost a couple hours into that movie, where they take a break from the war and they go to that island, I believe off South Carolina, like the shores where all the former slave population are living.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like they had houses.
It's a very
that look
rudimentary
like that.
house, but it's dry, and that ultimately is what you build. It's a very simple construction.
So they're gone when they get there.
They're gone. He says they're taken down. They're not burnt down. They're not scattered all over the place like they've been ransacked or whatever.
So there's just no
systematically taken down, right? In its place, he says a very strongly a place very strongly enclosed with a high palisade. Remember palisade,
yes.
Wooden fence, with courtines and flankers. Courtines and flankers, if you can imagine in a castle, you have the turrets, etc., with the slots where you can fire your bow and arrows out of and all that. I think Robin of Sherwood kind of thing. Courtines and flankers are how you can protect the sides of your fort, so someone's trying to climb over the wall, you can look out the tower and you can see down the side of the wall. So it's a military defense, a way of defending your castle, because you can shoot down the side because you're out in the tower that sticks out a little bit, and you can look down and shoot people. So courtines and flankers are military terms for designs of a fort that enables you to repel people who are attacking the walls of the fort.
Huh.
Okay, so if you were to look at a typical English castle, you have the round turrets on the corners. So you have the shape with the turrets on the corner. Well, if you're in that turret, you can see straight down the side of the wall.
Right.
And so anyone trying to climb that wall, you can shoot at them from that turret.
Right.
That's where we're talking courtines and flankers. That's the old terminology for having that kind of defensive structure. So he talks about them having built a very strong, palisade of great trees with courtines and flankers, very fort-like, quote unquote.
So if I'm following this, the way he's interpreting the situation right now is that when he left, they had these, what was it, wattle and daub?
Yeah.
They had these wattle and daub houses. They've been taken down, meaning there's like no evidence they were there, but there's not scattered burn marks or anything like that. So they're taken down, and now it's been replaced with a fort-like structure, and there's no one in it.
No one in it. Now, one of the posts to this fort, 5 foot from the ground, in capital letters, is written Croatoan. the word Croatoan. And he says, without any cross or sign of distress. Now, that last bit is because he records in 1587 that he'd left them with a way to kind of give him a message, leave a message behind if he got back and found they'd moved. He said, tell us where you've gone. And if you had to leave in a hurry, put a cross underneath the word so that we know that that cross said you had to leave in a hurry. But he says the word Croatoan was written without any sign of distress. So how you can interpret that, I think, is fairly straightforward. They were living there for a while. The Indians from the mainland started attacking again. The same people, the military colony, kind of got, annoyed a bit. So they built a fort to protect themselves, and then at some point decided that they were going to dismantle the houses and relocate. And so they left the fort, they put the word Croatoan on the post without the distress symbol to say that we had an orderly retreat, if you like, and we moved somewhere. And where we moved is Croatoan, which is the name of Hatteras Island.
This is some Percy Fawcett-like shit.
So basically in 1590, and then John White says, I know that they went to Hatteras Island. I know they went to Croatoan because they've told me that, and they've told me they did that without distress.
Can we pull that up, Hatteras Island, on the map? Let's just see where that bad boy's at.
So scroll down a bit. There, I see that triangular area.
Yes.
That's Hatteras Island there. So they went there. They knew that island.
So he's saying that according to what he found here, and they say Croatoan, that means that he determined that they went to Hatteras Island.
Yeah. Now, I have some reservations in terms of I don't believe they all went to Hatteras Island. And I have a reason for that.
Well, did he sail there right after this to go find them, and they weren't there?
Well, he tried to, but it looks like they were struck by another hurricane. And when the hurricanes are coming up that coast, in a sailing vessel, you can't sail against a hurricane.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So they give up and they go back to England.
So he never even went to try to find Hatteras Island?
Because they couldn't sail there because of the storms. Now,
but he couldn't set up camp and wait a week?
Well, this is what you've got to bear in mind. The people we're dealing with now are not Walter Raleigh and Richard Grenville. We're dealing with people who've bought the charter, who at that time have no investment in the people on that island. They're new people. There's new owners. They're not, the captain of the ship. They lose several guys actually in the process of trying.
But White's with them.
Yeah,
and White does have skin in the game. To this.
But he actually, and again, it's documented. It's his words. He laments the fact that he said, in the end, he basically says, "I persuaded them that we would go to the West Indies, the Caribbean."
Yes.
And overwinter there and repair the ship and make good and then make another attempt to get back to Roanoke. He actually believes that that's what they've agreed to. What happens is they don't sail back to Roanoke. They go to the Caribbean and then head back to England. So White is basically been lied to. And so he comes back to England.
And again, his daughter's in the middle of this.
His daughters and that.
So, all right. So they go back to England, and the takeaway from that trip is they found nothing at Roanoke. They believe they could have been at Hatteras. They didn't check Hatteras.
Yeah.
They go to the Caribbean. He gets lied to. Now they're back in England.
Yeah.
White, this is when White writes down the record of this, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Does he make another trip back?
No. He writes a covering letter with his report from 1590. He writes it to Richard Hakluyt, and he sends with it a covering letter. And that covering letter, again, it's documentary. It's in Hakluyt, and it basically says, "I feel awkward because I convinced some people to go." So there's your evidence that an investor in a colony or someone associated with a colony was convincing people to sign up to go to be the part of the colony. And he's also lamenting the fact that he has left his daughter and grandchild abandoned on Roanoke Island. Now,
she had a kid.
Yeah, Virginia Dare.
Oh, that's right. What year was that?
That's 1587. So, that Virginia Dare is born, and John White witnesses that before he leaves for home. Now, couple of things from that. Obviously, so he writes that letter in 1593, and he writes it from Southern Ireland, where he's at that point he's working for Thomas Harrier in Southern Ireland. Because as a painter, you're also a good map drawer, as you saw. He paints pretty good maps. So he was working on a map of the land in Southern Ireland at that time. So but there's nobody prepared to fund him a trip to sail back to find out if his family is still there. He is the last person to see them alive, and then they vanish.
And there's no trips that happened between then and Jamestown in 1607?
Well, there were a few attempts, but we've got about 3 documented, certainly 1597, 1602. But these were half-hearted attempts, because one of them actually records that they go to Chesapeake Bay because they think that that's where they were meant to be. But of course they weren't. They were at Roanoke Island.
Oh, so they didn't even go.
So they didn't even know where they were going to look. They didn't actually know that they were on Roanoke Island. And so they're very half-hearted attempts. There's a couple of attempts to find them, but nobody's absolutely sure where they're supposed to go.
Okay.
And by this time,
no
John White, if he's not dead, he's very, very elderly. So I think he was alive in Ireland in 1606 from the document that I found.
Oh, so we don't have a record of his death?
No, we don't. I'm pretty sure I know where he lived, and I have a good feeling I know where he was buried.
All right, well, we got to send you there with your bubonic plague suit.
Yeah, absolutely.
You go check it.
So the village of Ballynoe in County Cork is pretty sure where he lived, and that's where he's most likely to have died. So there are a couple of follow-ups from all this, which are kind of interesting, and this is where we get into trying to, little fragments that come up in historical documents at later dates that kind of allude to what might have happened to some of them. Now, before we get into them, I just wanted to say, people ask me, what do I think happened to them? When I submitted my book to my publisher, the last chapter in that book was never written because I just wanted to present the facts. And they said, you've studied this for 7 years of your life. And I mean, I have literally slept that damn research over this time. It was an obsession,
even the bibliography.
My late wife actually convinced me to finish that book because she said, you must, because that's a very important piece of work. And I did. That's why the dedication is to her in the front, because she never saw it published. She didn't live to see it published, but there we are. Anyway, so where was I?
The last chapter you didn't write. Didn't
write it because they came back to me and I said, I just want to present the facts and let people make up their own mind. Present all the evidence and say, that's the real story. That's the truth. That's exactly what happened. There's all the evidence. You make up your own mind what happened. And they said, you studied it 7 years. You must have an idea. You must have your own conclusion. And I do. And the analogy I want to use is take 4 people from different walks of life, give them 4 choices of places to go. Are they all going to agree on going to the same place?
No.
Thank you. And that is what I think about Lost Colony. Now, how I would break that down is I think it very obvious that all the families went to Hatteras because that was the most secure place. Manio was down there, friendly Indians, and it was a good place. It was the most obvious place for at least some of them to go. It's fair to say probably some of them were killed with the, fights with the Indians. I think some of the military men were also there in 1585. They were part of the military colony. So they're back there in 1587. They knew the colony was supposed to go to Chesapeake Bay. It's my belief that some of them would have made their way to Chesapeake Bay on the basis that if a rescue mission comes, they might be looking for them in Chesapeake Bay because that's where they were supposed to be left. If you can't trust the pilot,
that makes sense.
Let's cover the bases here, guys.
And how far away did you say that was again?
I don't know the exact distance, but it took them about 3 days, I think 3 to 4 days to get there from Roanoke. But the point is they knew where it was, okay, and they knew how to get there. And then they also had an ocean-going pinnace. They had a small ship that had made it across the Atlantic Ocean. And so therefore they had a crew for that ship. I think it is possible that one of the other things they might have considered is to send that ship back to get help in England. And the great question is did they ever make it back?
Could have crashed, yeah.
Could have sunk, could have whatever. It could have been set, But if they did, I think it sunk without trace, because if they'd have been captured by the Spanish, then they would be in the Spanish records somewhere, and they're not.
Haven't you talked about and looked into research on, though, the whole potential DNA lines in the area, which gets to, did they start? I mean, maybe the Croatoan women were like really hot. There's a lot of
It was a
males
matriarchal
there.
society, and you have to bear in mind, matriarchal society, women choose their men. Can you think about the women of the day? They got this guy that wears a loincloth and he's got a bow and arrow, and then they got this guy who's got a suit, almost a suit of armor,
shining armor. Yeah.
shining armor. He's very fancily dressed. He's got this fire stick that can kill at X distance, etc. He's going to be able to protect the family. So, I'm pretty confident that there was intermarriage. There had to have been. It's impossible to think that 85 single men did not, at least some of them, intermarry with a society where the women chose their men. It's absolutely impossible to consider that. And I have got something here that might actually confirm some of that, to take it forward. And I will come back to your question where you're taking that. Really interesting. The first record we have after the events is all over. So John White is in Ireland. He probably died around 1606 or so. Richard Grenville is killed at the Battle of Flores in 1591. So there's really no one around by the time from that Roanoke period, by the time Jamestown is settled. Okay. So Jamestown settled in 1607. Thomas Gates arrives a little while later, about 2-3 years later. His mission is to save Jamestown because it's dying out. They're committing cannibalism. It's falling apart.
Committing cannibalism?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that was going on. And so he's sent on a mission to save Jamestown. Okay. And he receives his set of instructions from the Virginia Company of London, which is a new company, by the way. This is a different set of investors from those involved in Roanoke.
Okay.
So this is where we get into corporate espionage and things like that here, because it's kind of interesting. One of his instructions is, and I quote, at Picaracamic, where you shall find 4 of the English alive left by Sir Walter Raleigh, which live under the protection of a Werrance, a king, enemy to Powhatan, by whose consent you shall never recover them. He's told there are 4 men of Raleigh's alive and well, but he's instructed never to try and recover them, never to try and get them back. Now, think about it. Those 4 men would be representatives of the previous company that was set up to set up Roanoke.
Yes.
So that would mean they had a prior claim on America over the company that set up Jamestown.
And it's right there in writing.
It's right there in writing. He's specifically instructed not to rescue them.
But how do they know that those 4 are there? Do we not know that?
There must have been communication, at Jamestown. There must have been that communication going on, because we know the whole Powhatan story and Pocahontas and all that stuff. So that's where this information comes from.
Wait, where does Pocahontas tie into this?
Well, what I'm saying is that the Jamestown colony was among relatively friendly Indians. So, they weren't at war with them, so it would have been easy to find information. And they were probably told that, we've met you guys before. There's 4 of them at so-and-so place. And they would have probably been kept as, shall we use the word, slaves, because they knew how to build houses and they knew how to make, fire shot and stuff like that. So there's all of that going on. So that's one reference. The next reference we have is a very well-known reference in 1701. So we're now 4 generations past that.
Yeah, this is way after.
But this is very important. John Lawson is a British surveyor. His job is to survey North Carolina for settlement, basically. He has a guide called Eno Wills. His name is Wills, and he's an Eno Indian. John Lawson works out that Eno was born of a Hatteras Island or Croatoan mother. Okay. And he tells us, he reports, this is John Lawson's writing, he tells us that these Indians tell us that several of their ancestors were white people and could talk in a book, as we do, the truth of which is confirmed by grey eyes being frequently found amongst these Indians and no others.
Oh, so their genetic traits are literally... Whoa.
Now we're cooking with gas. Yeah, exactly. So in 1701, John Lawson records that there are grey-eyed Indians who know how to speak from a book.
Is there anything in his record that says that he was like a liar or not reputable?
No. John Lawson was a very straight-up, a boring individual, boring kind of bureaucratic, bureaucratic who just was sent there to survey the land, and that's precisely what he did. He also talks about there being the ruins of a fort on Roanoke Island, and that there were discovered some English coins and a brass gun, a powder horn, and one small quarter-deck gun made of iron staves and hoops with metal. So he talks about there being fragments of things on Roanoke Island that had to have come from that.
And they found that, like, archaeologically speaking, or
just
among the
littered
tribes?
on the ground. He would have not dug from them. They would have been there, lying there.
But like 100 years later.
Yeah, 1701. So, and then we have one more.
Still littered on the ground all that time?
No. We have a record from your Civil War period of there being some looting from that site. Yeah, there was looting by the Civil War soldiers, and at one point they were told stay away from that area because it's like protected. It's an old fort or something like that. So there is this command that goes out: stay away from the area, stop nicking stuff from that site.
Whoa!
So we have one last reference, and it's the last reference we have that could relate to the Lost Colony, and it's in 1712, and it's very, very humorous. So I'll warn you about this one. It was reported by the Reverend, the vicar, if you like, John Ernstone of the city of Bath in North Carolina. He writes to his superiors, complaining that his parishioners from Hatteras Island, were half Indian and half English, are an offence to my own, and I gravely doubt the kingdom of heaven was designed to accommodate such. They stunk, and their condition was not improved by the amounts of sacramental wine they lapped up, nor by sprinkling with baptismal waters.
I'm sorry to hear that for him.
Okay. Half Indian, half English.
And what year are we talking?
1712.
All right. My one thing on that one would be that's so far after that. Do we have records of people post Jamestown being in these areas?
They were certainly, we do know that there was a trapper on Roanoke Island in 1654. So 1701, 1712, is it too late to be people who are descendants of Lost Colony? We don't know.
Be.
We will never know until we actually find, find something about it. So the next thing before we get to DNA, because I want to answer that question, it's a very important question. Are you familiar with the Dare Stones? Okay, this is another bizarre story that is another one of these folklore myths and legends things. Back in the early 30s, this guy found a stone, a rock, with a carving on it, with a message. And the message appears to be written by Eleanor Dare, and it talks about how they were all killed and they're buried somewhere and all the rest of it. She talks about...
Right here?
There we go. That one there is the first Dare stone, and that is the one that people believe... if you could pull that up, because this is really great.
Art. That's incredible.
This is great. So... this is claimed to have been written by Eleanor Dare. Okay. Now, the argument that some people have that this is genuine, because they say it's written in the Elizabethan language.
Can you pull up the second picture there, Alessi?
Yeah.
That one with both.
Yeah, the second, yeah. So, and that's great. You can leave that right there, because that's really important at the bottom of the right stone. she talks about them being dead and that they were only 7 were saved and they were buried in 4 miles east of this river, and we know exactly where this is, on a small hill, and the names were all written on the rock. So think about this. We think, up to 120 names written on a rock. You think someone would have found a rock with 120 names on by now? Bearing in mind this is swampland, it's a nonsense. But the sucker punch, there's 2 sucker punches really. Paul Green, who wrote the Lost Colony play, that stone was offered to him for money. And he remarked that it was curious how the colonists knew the storyline of his play 400 years before he wrote it.
Mm.
But the sucker punch for me is on the right stone at the bottom. You'll see EWD.
Yes.
Eleanor White Dare. Now, this is where it falls over, because the idea of a woman using her maiden name as her middle Christian name, so Eleanor White becomes Eleanor White Dare, so she writes White uses that as a Christian name. It's a Spanish thing, and it became fashionable in America in the mid-1800s.
Okay, so a while after.
Yeah. Now, in England, we do use what we call double-barreled surnames, as you know from me. But the earliest records of that would have been very, very high status people and were generally around about 1700.
So what is that telling us here?
That stone could not have been written by Eleanor White Dare because it's signed EWD. So all the other arguments about, I don't agree with the constructs. It's not written in Elizabethan language. It's written in someone trying to write Elizabethan language. But that key thing, EWD, she would not have signed herself EWD or Eleanor White Dare in 1587.
So this
when
is
she
not...
married Ananias, and you've seen it, I've got the record. Ananias Dare marries Eleanor White. It would have said as Eleanor White Dare or something like that.
Yes.
It would have been a note. Nothing. She was Eleanor Dare to the day whenever she died. She was not Eleanor White Dare. That stone is a forgery, just like all the others are.
Is there any type of explanation that could say that she would have signed it that way?
No. None whatsoever, because it just wasn't the way that things
So
were signed.
no one ever signed it like that?
No.
Not even by accident?
If you were if you're writing a letter to your father, to your mother, how do you sign it?
My first name.
Would she not sign that Eleanor?
Yeah.
Or would she have signed it Eleanor Dare? She would not have signed it, or she might have even signed it Eleanor White, but that would
What
have
if
been
she thought it was going to be a message for the future? If people found it, it's on a rock in this case, and she's like, okay, let me make sure. If I just sign it Eleanor, there could have been other Eleanors, but if I give my initials, they can maybe put it down to where I am.
But she would have signed it Eleanor Dare because that's her married name. Think about it.
How common of a name was
Here's
Dare?
the thing. John White, in 1587, records the birth of his granddaughter, Virginia Dare.
Yes.
EWD is an American adaptation of the Spanish method of using that, and it occurs in the mid-1800s. That stone is a forgery. It's not authentic. And I mean, I could argue about the constructs of the language used on there. I could argue about where is this stone with these 100-odd names on it. But EWD.
Can they use some form of dating to measure not just the age of the rock, because the rock is obviously very, very old, way older than this stuff, but like the age of the writing itself scientifically?
That's a good question. I don't know is the answer. What I think would be possible would be you would be able to work out how it was written on the rock. So if someone scratched it on a rock using a hard rock, then you would see grains of the rock that was used to write, scratch that on there.
Understood.
But imagine if it was like with, say, a drill or metal tool or something like that, and we start getting into questions. I don't buy it. I say that is a forgery.
Okay. All right. So what about the DNA stuff, though.
Okay, DNA and archaeology. So you remember at the start we talked about me coming over in 2008, 2009. Well, my research very quickly led to saying, logically, if we're going to find any sign of these people, archaeologically speaking, any remnants, it's going to be on Hatteras Island. You know, are we going to find skeletal remains where they've been buried? Some of them, you know, may have been buried there. What about the pottery that they would have used? You know, the cups, the saucers, the plates. What about the weapons that they had? Would we find any of that there? You know, all these things that are signs, if you like, or symbols from that period that would be able to date it. If we found dating evidence in the right level in the soil, and it's important, it's called stratigraphy. Best way to explain that, if you dropped a coin from today on the ground today and no one picked it up, 500 years from now, that would have worked, the soil would have been built up over the top of that, and it would be, say, a couple of feet, 2-3 feet down in the ground. But everything else in that level would be the same date. Yeah.
Understood.
So stratigraphy, very important. So we did some digs, Lost Colony Research Group. We did some digs in 2009, 10, 11, and 12. The key ones were 9, 10, and 11, really. In 2009, we started to make some discoveries, and the images at the bottom are just a small sample. I mean, a really small sample. We had 16 boxes of finds for things we found that, you know, give us an indication of English habitation or English influence at a very early date on Hatteras Island. Now, it's really important to say that you never know whether these are trade goods washed up on the shore or the Indians found them somewhere and collected it, because it's just impossible to know for sure, because the only way the archaeology is going to confirm that we have found the Lost Colony is if we find an English Caucasian skeleton, okay? Because then that's when we get into the DNA and various things. Or we find something like, say, Virginia Dare's pinky ring or something like that, you know, something personal to one of the colonists. That's what we need. But these examples are some of the typical sort of things we found. The one on the left is, I found this, it's a clay pipe. The front half of the bowl is missing. So you've got that concave area, that's where the bowl was for the tobacco. Quite small, and you'll see that bowl is pointing forward rather than kind of upright, like a traditional modern day pipe. Yeah. That's because this pipe is quite early. It's not as early as the Lost Colony, but it is almost certainly from 1600s, late 1600s. So we're getting back now. The next item, we're not 100% sure what it actually was. We think it's the remains of a very ornate wax fob, because back in those days, you know, if you wrote a letter, you would have a wax seal and then you would imprint your stamp on the seal. And that actually, it's been crushed, but it looks like it might have been some kind of wax seal, which could have been Lost Colony period. You know, there's not enough of it to be able to positively identify what it actually had. Now, in relation to that, there was a very famous find of a signet ring that has a lion rampant on it, so a lion standing upright. This was found years ago out of context, and it's been widely talked about as belonging to the Lost Colony, and it was solid gold. It's made of brass, and there's nothing to connect it to the family it's supposed to be connected to. So there's a lot of red herrings in all these finds going on. The third item is very, very, very authentic to the period. It's actually the firing mechanism from an old, like flintlock or musket weapon from that period. That is unquestionably Elizabethan and no later than about 1610. So almost certainly Lost Colony period. And of course the wood would have rotted away because the soil is very acid. So you're left with the metal parts, heavily corroded. But that appears to be the flash pan and mechanism from
that's convincing.
A gun of that period.
That's interesting.
Okay. The last piece, remember I talked about wattle and daub?
Yes. The houses.
There's a piece right there. that is a piece of daub. Now, if you were to look closely at that, there is actually an indentation that runs the full length of it near the top. You can just make it out. There you go. Right, just above the arrow, you'll see that there's like, it looks like a narrow depression that goes right across the length. You got it right there. That's where the hazel twigs would have been, because when you made daub, you pressed it onto the hazel twigs. So when the hazel finally rots away, all you're left with is the indentation where the hazel.
Bravo, yeah. Alas, I want to make a quick note just for our production. For this slide, they're a little small, so maybe when in the post edit we can put the actual pictures one by one. Yeah. Just double checking that. Continue, Andy. Sorry.
Sorry, you could. So the material it's made from, we know how they made the daub. Daub requires lime. And it goes concrete hard, this stuff, by the way, absolute concrete. This is unquestionably a piece of daub that is from the same period as John Lawson's grey-eyed people who could speak from a book. It's unquestionably from that period.
And when was that?
1701?
Yeah, so that's still 100.
It's still 100 years, but, 4 generations. 4 generations ago, 1920. Would you like to see a picture of my grandparents from 1910? It's not that long ago, 4 generations.
Right, but it's long enough that there could have been other action in the region.
I agree.
Is what I'm saying.
Totally agree.
Right.
And this is still, subjective, if you like. But we have so much of this sort of stuff that it gets to a point where I think the easiest way to explain it is that whole thing about, a lot of smoke. There's a fire there somewhere. Yes. We are that close, I think. Finally,
that third one is interesting to me.
It is
that musket.
The point about the last piece of the daub, you'll see there appears to be a bit of plate or ceramic stuck in the side of it. You see that on the right hand side.
Yes.
It's end on.
Yes, I do.
That's tin glaze ware, and that was produced around about 1700.
Okay.
So that dates that pretty accurately as potentially being the sort of house, because the design of the house was 2 rooms with 1 room with a hearth in the middle of it made out of stones. A classic 2-room Watland daub house is the design that the Lost Colonists would have built. Okay. So although that's a later piece, these things are repaired just like you repair houses today. So yes, it's somewhat subjective. It could be a fragment from a house that was a Lost Colonist house. It could be a fragment from a house that belonged to those grey-eyed Indians.
Yeah, but again, if that plate on the end of it's dated to 1700,
so we're still. This is a point. We are still later date, but but it's a very, very English thing. So you're talking 1701. To 1715, when that stuff was around, of people building houses and having those plates in 1700 and living on Hatteras Island, when the only people we know that were living there for certain were these grey-eyed Indians that Lawson talks about.
Fascinating.
Potential, yeah.
But
absolutely.
You've run into issues with being able. So I think I remember there's 3 names in the area: Berry, Dare. What's the other one? Do you remember offhand?
There are a number of names associated with the area, to be honest with you. The Berry name is one that we've tried to follow up a lot with a lot of connections. Dare is the one, but I need to Berry.
Okay. Yeah, you're good. You're good. You're far enough away.
The interesting one, of course, is Dare.
Of course.
And I have to tell you that all these people looking for a descendant of the Dares are looking for the wrong person.
Why?
Well, and I've got the evidence for this. Ananias and Eleanor, a lot of people think Virginia Dare was their first child as well as firstborn American. No, she was not. She was their 3rd child. Their first child was called John, after her father. The second child was a daughter called Thomasine, named after her mother, Thomasine White. Thomasine dies in 1590, and John White's wife also Thomasine, dies in 1591, which leaves John White with his grandson, John Dare, as the only ones still around from that family in 1591. John White is obviously getting old by now, and there is a custody battle over John Dare, the oldest son of Ananias and Eleanor Dare. That custody battle was finally resolved in the registers of Canterbury, the prerogative court of Canterbury. So this is could call it like a family court where they decide custody of the kids, etc., that kind of thing in the modern day. And the record very specifically gives custody of John Dare in his minority, so he's under 18 at that time, of course, to a gentleman called John Noakes, who is a family member. So he was a cousin or, whatever. So John Dare is now the adopted child of John Noakes. And in England, when he got married at some point, if he survived, John Dare would have married as John Noakes. A descendant of the Dare family today is going to be someone with the Noakes surname, not the Dare family.
If it lived through the male lines over the years too, which is a long time.
Oh yeah,
someone
absolutely.
just had a daughter in there.
Absolutely. So, but all these people looking for a descendant of the Dare, they're looking for the wrong family.
Wow.
So there's that. So if we go to the next slide, I can cover the important stuff you want to about what we really need. So. Obviously, I've talked about in the archaeology, we need a skeleton that we can positively ID.
Yep.
We need something, a personal effect of some description. Now, the other thing that we can go for is a tooth.
Yeah, dental records, right.
Dental records. Now, it's not so much dental records, really fairly recent technology in archaeology. The dentine in your teeth, as you grow up, it literally records the water that you've been drinking, the profile of the water, the amount of calcium in it, whatever, okay? And because we now know all the water profiles for different parts of the world, different parts of England, for example, if we found a tooth and we treated it with either oxygen-16 or oxygen-18 isotope, it will give us a profile of the water the owner of that tooth was drinking.
Whoa.
So if we found a skeleton that dated to around the late 1580s, 1590s maybe, and we had a tooth and the skeleton was Caucasian, it was European, we could test that tooth and know where they lived or where they were born and raised. And of course, if it said London, Bideford, whatever, then you'd have to argue if we found the skeleton of a lost colonist.
Now, how do we get a goddamn tooth?
All we need is a tooth, right?
How do we get it?
Well, yeah, we need to find the skeleton with the tooth, of course. But yeah, we would be able to extract DNA from the bones with a bit of luck, although soil is very acid. Yeah. And we have a lot of people that we have DNA profiles for.
Who are the Melanesians? Right,
I'll cover those. We have to be careful about what we say about these last two. But importantly, we need a male line because the Y chromosome that only men carry is incredibly well documented. We know a great deal about the Y chromosome. It's a fraction of the size of the female X chromosome. So it is fully decoded. And so therefore, to find matches is incredibly easy. We actually did find one match when we were looking at people in Bideford with people here. And it wasn't what we wanted, but it proved the technology. We found a guy living on Prince Edward Island in Canada who had the same markers as a guy living in Bideford today.
Whoa.
And then when we did the trace back, we found that they were descended from two brothers who lived just outside Bideford in 1701. And one of them had left for Prince Edward Island in 1717, and then those lines had developed that way. But 300 years later, we could still confirm they had a common ancestor.
Who found this?
This was found by Roberta Estes, Bobby Estes, good friend of mine. She's a DNA specialist. She's been all over the world doing DNA. She can talk about this more so than I can, but she's down in Florida, guys. But anyway, the last two, the Melungeons, right? The Melungeons are a group.
That name.
Yeah, Melungeons are a group of people who claim to be lost colonists.
Okay. Where are they from?
They're kind of scattered around on this side of the Mississippi, but the important thing
but
is...
where are they from? Like, where'd they hail from?
Well, they just live, I think, North Carolina and various other areas. But my point is that they've always claimed to be descendants of the Lost Colony. Right?
But do they... Okay, so they claim to be descendants of the literal Bideford people.
Well, yeah, basically...
Do they consider them Bideford people?
They consider themselves to be descendants of the Lost Colony, okay?
Okay.
But some of them actually chose to test to prove a point. And when the test came back, no. They are the result of a relationship which we need to be politically correct about. And they're nothing to do with the Lost Colony whatsoever.
Oh, what kind of relationship?
Possibly slave owner. Okay? Because the
yikes.
DNA is not Lost Colony DNA.
Not good.
The Lumbies won't test, almost certainly for fear of the same fate.
Who are they?
Will not take. They are based in Lumberton, around Lumberton in North Carolina. They will not test. Now, they put up all sorts of claims, it's against our beliefs and blah, blah, blah.
Oh, God.
But they cannot make that claim scientifically without a proven test for us to benchmark against.
All right, so they're cut.
So that's that. That's where we are. So I just want to summarize, wrap this up now. Unless you've got some more any other questions you need answering. So I just put it all down. When I finished it, I thought, it's just crazy. If Ralph Lane hadn't have taken the trip back with Sir Francis Drake and it had stayed for Grenville, it would still be there possibly. If Grenville hadn't got stuck on the sandbank, he would have got there early enough. If Grenville's 15 men had actually sat tight on Roanoke and done their job, they would have been there when John White arrived in 87. If Simon Fernando had taken them to Chesapeake Bay, that might have succeeded, just like Jamestown did in the end in Chesapeake Bay. If the captain of the Brave and the Roe hadn't picked a fight with the French in the Bay of Biscay in 1588, he might have got back, and then that would have been okay. Francis Drake and Ralph Lane, and again John White in 1590 probably had some real issues with hurricanes while they were trying to sort out what they were doing. John White couldn't get back because of a hurricane. And then, of course, the classic one, that the Spanish Armada chose to attack England in 1588, just as we were going back with supplies for the Lost Colony.
It's a lot.
It's just incredible,
It'd be an unbelievable coincidence.
Yeah. I guess the last slide is really just me summarising my last comments in the book, and it was what I was asked to write, and it's a fact. I think, if you think about it, if we find just one descendant of a lost colonist or a descendant of Grenville's men alive today, that revelation will rewrite the history of America. And in my opinion, it would also provide the necessary catalyst to guarantee recognition for Sir Richard Grenville, for without him, I doubt the story of the Lost Colony of Roanoke would ever have been written, because Raleigh didn't come over here. It was because of Grenville's efforts that there was even the success there was.
This is some pretty unbelievable stuff that you've dug up here. I mean, I got to read the book. Again, it's Richard Grenville and the Lost Colony of Roanoke. It'll be in the Amazon store. Link in my description. It's right there. I mean, like I said, it's not so much a conspiracy as it is just a cool finding. You'd be able to have some sort of recognition for the real people who actually tried to do it here first. And it's also so mysterious because it's like they write that Croatoan without the distress signal. Mm-hmm. So we know how much of the narrative of America is that, there's unfortunately some very negative history with us displacing Native Americans and stuff like that. Was the first one actually a peaceful coalition, though? The dark side to it is that what if it wasn't and it turned the other way and it went the way that a lot of other stuff did, and that we know throughout history, where the two groups fought, and in this case they all got killed. But it's really a tragedy in a lot of ways to me at the middle of the story that you have this guy John White who is in search of his family and then never gets the chance to even make sure that they'd gone or find out if they went to Hatteras. And then never even gets to come back, and he lives out the rest of his days back home wondering whatever happened. That's tragic.
It's extraordinary, isn't it?
Yes.
And it's, I mean, as I say, when I started getting into this story, the more I started digging, the more I thought, you can't make this up.
No.
It's just, you always hear the basic, the voyages, he did this, he came back, he did this, he came back. And then you hear the folklore, myths and legends that are thrown into it, etc. Alien abduction or whatever it is, and all that. And I'm like, no, guys, I set out to lay out the facts. And that's what that book was all about. I never intended or never expected to make money out of it. I mean, I still rent a house. I don't own a house, so it hasn't made that much money. Maybe Walt Disney will want to give me a deal for the script. Who knows?
Well, you're a Yankee now. You live here. You're one of us. You're on Team America.
Hey, y'all.
Never do that again, please. All right. Well, I actually there is another thing I want to talk about. We're coming up on. I'm just looking at the time here. I'm guessing the runtime on this episode raw right now is like 3:15. So I don't like to go too much longer than that. So what I'm going to do, two things. Number one, you've talked about potentially doing a YouTube channel where you go through this bit by bit, and then I talked about you should also then cover other parts of colonial history. In the comments, please let this guy know that he needs to do that, because I will watch the shit out of that channel. So that's number one.
Thank
I
you.
hope we're linking to a YouTube channel in the future and we have more things to talk about.
Oh, yeah. I'm so grateful for you allowing me to put
man.
this out here, Julian.
Thank you
Thank you very much.
Thank you for coming. It's been amazing. The second thing is, we're going to stop the podcast now, and then we're either going to do something that we'll have as a separate clip on our Clips channel, Julian Dorey Clips, on YouTube, or we'll do a Patreon episode out of this. Alessia and I will make that determination, but I want to talk with you before you leave about History Channel and some of the stuff that happened there, because what I'll say to not leave people in suspense is that for whatever reason, some of what was put in there obviously did not include everything you had to say. It did not include something like what we've discussed on this full podcast. I want to make sure you set some of that record straight and go through that. So until then, everybody else, you know what it is. Give it a thought. Get back to me. Peace. Thank you guys for watching the episode. Before you leave, please be sure to hit that subscribe button and smash that like button on the video. It's a huge help. And also, if you're over on Instagram, be sure to follow the show at Julian Dorey Podcast, or also on my personal page at Julian D. Dorey. Both links are in the description below. Finally, if you'd like to catch up on our latest episodes, use the Julian Dorey Podcast playlist link in the description below. Thank you.